Hello, welcome to the Southern Region RAC. We're ready to get started tonight. We appreciate those that are attending, and hopefully you can come and find a chair in here. We'll make room for you. We want to start out with welcomes and introductions. So we'll start with the RAC. Let's go ahead and start over there with you, Austin. If you can just introduce yourself, who you represent, where you're from, and then we'll move across the RAC.
I'm Austin Atkinson from Cedar City, Utah, representing the public at large.
Dan Fletcher, Bureau of Land Management, Cedar City, Utah.
Riley Roberts, Tropic, Utah, sportsman.
Tammy Pearson. I live in Minersville, representing elected officials from Beaver County.
Gene Boardman from Hinckley, representing the public at large.
Berlin King from Bicknell, representing agriculture.
Chuck Chamberlain from Cedar City, representing the Forest Service.
And then we have three members of our RAC online, Bart, Chad, and Nick. Could you introduce yourself in that order?
Bart Batista, Kanab, Utah, non-consumptive rep.
Chad Utley, St. George, Utah, public at large.
Nick Jorgensen, non-consumptive, St. George, Utah.
We want to thank you guys for joining online. This is a nice format where we can take advantage of this and have our RAC members here even when they aren't able to attend in person. So thanks for being here. My name is Braden Richmond. I'm the chair. I represent Sportsman. I'm from Beaver, Utah. We also want to recognize we have a room full of division personnel. If I went around and tried to introduce, I'd have the wrong names. We thank you guys all for being here and appreciate your time being here. Also, we have several members of the Wildlife Board here. So online is Wade Heaton, Carl Hurst, and saw Kevin walking around somewhere. I'm sure he'll be back in. So we appreciate their interest in being here and appreciate them attending. In addition, I want to recognize Paul Niemeyer, past member of the Wildlife Board and chair. So thanks for being here. With that, we'll go ahead and jump right in. I guess one other comment I want to make before we get going, we appreciate the public being here. We really are glad that we have the public meetings again. We're kind of on this post-COVID stage. We'd encourage you to comment. We hope you didn't come here to just watch the proceedings, but we want to hear your input and encourage you to do so. Make sure to fill out a comment card so that we can get those and invite you up at the appropriate times. So again, thanks for coming and putting the effort into being here. Let's go ahead and start with the approval of the agenda and the minutes. If there's any questions or comments, or we could just entertain a motion on approving the agenda and minutes.
I'll make the motion to approve both.
Thanks. Tammy's made a motion to approve the agenda and minutes.
I'll second it.
Berlin's got a second. All in favor? And then we'll just do roll call on those online. Bart?
Aye.
Chad?
Aye.
Nick?
Yes.
So approved unanimously. Thank you. Next, we'll go over the wildlife meeting update. Kind of interesting. Some of the RACs met before the Wildlife Board, and so they didn't do this in their RACs, but we'll get the opportunity to do this. There's quite a long list here, so be patient with me as I go through this. At the Wildlife Board, and I'm just going to read the minutes just exactly as it was done at the board meeting. So there was a motion to accept the recommendation as presented with the addition of a 3-year waiting period for youth, a 5-year waiting period for adults and those who harvest a trumpeter swan during the swan season, and a 7-year waiting period for those who fail to check in a harvested swan. This was a really interesting discussion. I would encourage anyone that is curious to go and watch how this played out. I think it showed the process working correctly and showed a good solution for a kind of a developing situation. So that motion passed unanimously. Then there was another motion to move that we remove the 7-year waiting period for those who fail to check in a harvested swan from the previous motion and instead follow the penalties as established in state statute. There was some discussion on that of just trying to align and also trying to stay within side of statutes and how the rules and statutes work together. Again, good discussion and some lessons probably to be learned there, and it was interesting to watch how that all shook out. And that was also passed unanimously. Then there was a motion that we asked the division to look into changing statute to reflect a 7-year waiting period for poaching a swan and to have the division report back. That motion passed unanimously. Then we move on to the elk permit recommendations. There was a motion to not accept the recommendation to go to a draw and instead keep any bull and spike elk permits over the counter. That motion passed unanimously. And there was a motion that we stay with the 50-50 split on max points, and that passed unanimously. Next, there was a motion that they asked the division to look into a 3-year season structure for big game season dates and the possibilities of hunter-oriented regulation reforms, including amount required and what other states allow. And that motion passed unanimously. Next motion was that they moved to approve the recommendations as presented with the addition of a 2-day extension on the youth any bull hunt. That passed unanimously. Then on to the CWMU and landowner permit recommendations. There was a motion that we approve as presented with the caveat that any additional public tags due from public lands being traded out come from the private allocation and to reconvene the CWMU advisory committee to reevaluate the rule. And there were 2 people that recused, and it passed unanimously. Next motion was on the once-in-a-lifetime season dates. That there was a motion to approve corrected dates as presented. That passed unanimously. And then a motion to deny the variance request for the possession of a capuchin monkey as presented, and that passed unanimously. Any questions? There was a lot of motions, and that means it was a good meeting. As usual, I was able to attend, and some really good discussions, well thought out. I guess I would just commend the board on how they proceeded in that meeting and how they approached it, because there was a lot of issues, a lot of tweaks that needed to be done. So any questions or comments on what happened? Okay, I'll turn it over to Kevin for an update.
Okay, Paul or Carmen, could we have the RAC update presentation pulled up, please? Okay, I wanted to start with this picture in recognition of today being Pearl Harbor Day, a day that I think we should all remember every year, and whether it affected any of us directly, certainly did our country. And so I just wanted to make sure that that was recognized. Let's go to the next slide, please. From our wildlife section, next slide. Deer classification will be wrapping up within the next couple of weeks, and we'll be anxious to compile that data. We heard about deer captures. Those are moving along ahead of schedule. I know Teresa was reaching out to the RAC members. Has anybody gone out to any of the deer captures that have taken place?
Part of the day.
So Braden meant part of the day. If you want to go, you better hurry, because they're going to finish tomorrow on the Pine Valley. They just have one area left. They'll be doing Mataqua, which is quite a ways out there, but an interesting area. And a little bit later start tomorrow. They'll be starting about 10 o'clock because there's some maintenance that has to be done on the chopper. But I can put you in touch with Teresa if there is anybody that has interest there. And then Christmas bird counts will be going on over the next few weeks. And you can get with Keith Day if you're interested in being involved with that. That's why I had that picture at the beginning with the white-breasted nuthatch. In our aquatic section, so we have a new Lake Powell project supervisor. His name's Dan Keller. He's filling some very big shoes with Wayne Gustavson retiring. Wayne was at Lake Powell for 45 years and you can't replace Wayne, but Dan comes with a passion for Lake Powell. He's been going there since he was a teenager, still goes there several times a year with his family. We're excited to have him. He's also a veteran that served in Iraq, has a really well-rounded person. Other projects, we're finishing up the marinas at Fish Lake. If you haven't been up to Fish Lake, or if you're familiar with Fish Lake and what it used to look like, you won't recognize the marinas anymore. They're bigger, they're deeper, they'll accommodate any boats. Lots of partners that have gone into making that happen with the Division of Wildlife, the Forest Service, the county, sportsmen, grants that we've gotten through the Governor's Office of Recreation. It's been lots of partners there. And I think the only thing that will be left after we finish up the last marina this year, the Bowery Marina is being done now, is there'll be a fishing pier that will be built that we're still fundraising for. It'll also be a huge addition. It'll go out 100 to 150 feet and get beyond the weed line, and then we'll tee and go 100 feet in either direction, which will allow handicap access, but then also a lot of just fishing access. There's really no fishing from the shore at Fish Lake right now because of the weed barrier that circles the lake, and so this will get beyond that and allow people to fish from the shore. Next slide, please. Our habitat section. Lots of projects going on. I won't read all those individually, but you can look through there, the various bullhog and lop and scatter and chaining projects that are, this is the time of year when we get a lot of that work done, and lots of chainsaws and track hose and everything else being out on the ground right now doing habitat projects. From our wildlife management areas, we've cleaned sediment out of the irrigation pond at Elbow Ranch. We had a flood event up there that put a lot of sediment into our pond, and we've also been working on the irrigation ditch in Kingston Canyon. And then just as a reminder, we'll have seasonal road closures that will begin January 1st on most of the WMAs in the southern region. Outreach section, these pictures are, go back please, from our Christmas party, and we gave out of a couple of awards. On the left there is Mike Jensen and then Mike Wardle. They both received what we call our Clint Meekum award. If those of you remember Clint, he was a employee of the division that passed away from cancer, and just loved and appreciated by everybody. And so we give an award at our Christmas party every year to honor other employees who exemplify the qualities that Clint had, which are honesty, kindness, and hard work are kind of the three basic qualities that we look for in that. Next slide, please. That's the wrong picture that's supposed to be. That should be a picture of Adam Cavalunas, who's our new outreach manager, but he's here in person. So Adam, if you'll stand up. Adam is filling the role that Phil Tuttle used to fill in the region. He's our new outreach manager. We've also just hired Cody Evans to fill the volunteer services coordinator in the region. That's the position that deals with all the dedicated hunters. And so many of you will get to know Cody. He's really great. And then a couple of events that are coming up. We'll have a bald eagle viewing day in early February. And then of course the Snow Goose Festival that takes place every year out in Delta will be February 18th and 19th. From our law enforcement, you're going to see a really gory picture here. And Paul sent me that picture, but didn't give me any explanation. Paul, what's that picture about?
Just outside Cedar City.
Okay. We're in the process of conducting interviews to replace some open districts that we have. Stetson West, who's our officer out of Fillmore, received an award from the Highway Patrol called the Life Saving Award. He was one of the first on scene in that accident that took place between Kanosh and Meadow, if you remember that earlier in the fall. Horrific accident, and he took some heroic measures there that saved a lady's life for sure and helped several others. So congratulate Stetson on that award. Our officers are wrapping up all their cases from October. That's a process that'll, go for the next several months, and we're looking at monitoring illegal trap sets. This is the time of year when trappers are out trapping bobcats in particular, and they'll be working the making sure that those are legal sets and that trap check times are being traps are being checked as often as they need to be. Next slide. That's all I have. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If I could just make a quick comment on that, that was neat to see the awards there. I've had the opportunity to work with, or work was probably the wrong term. I've had the opportunity to watch Mike Wardle work crowds several times, and he does a great job. We really have appreciated him. He's met with some public meetings I've been to several times, and good to see the division acknowledging that, and I can attest to that. I really have a lot of respect for Mike, so good to see. Let's go ahead and move on with our first agenda, or I guess it's agenda item number 5, the first informational item with emerging technologies and survey results. Just want to clarify that this agenda item 5 is informational, and agenda item 6, that's where we'll have an action item on the rule amendments. So we'll get some information to why these rule amendments were suggested. But in agenda item 6 is when we will actually make motions and hear from the public on that. So if you want to give us just a brief summary of your presentation, that would be great. Thank you. Go ahead.
If I make it too brief, I guess we can ask follow-up questions that will make it not brief, but
Something tells me this won't be brief. But
this part should. The follow-up portion is usually not. But so in March of 2021, the division did an emerging technology survey that talked about a host of technologies that we're starting to see in the field, and kind of proposed or put out information to see where the public fell as far as the use of those technologies with the taking of wildlife. After that survey was concluded, the Wildlife Board then asked us to go back and do another survey specific to trail camera data, which was included in the first survey, but they wanted a more in-depth survey conducted on trail cameras. And so we ran that in the September-October timeframe of 2021, and that is also part of this informational. So varying opinions on the technologies, but that's a quick summary of what this informational is about.
Okay, thank you. Again, just a reminder on this one, this is informational, but we will open it up to questions from the RAC, and then we'll have questions from the public. We won't have comments from the public. We'll save that to the next agenda item, but we will do questions on this one. So any questions from the RAC on this, the emerging technologies survey results? Go ahead, Austin.
Wyatt, can you explain to us a little bit how the surveys work in the department, in the division specifically? I guess where I'm coming from, I've talked to Matt a little bit where the first survey came from, I understand, and he's the social science coordinator. But I noticed there's no third parties used. We don't use an outside university study group. Sometimes surveys come right from you. So how does that work in the department, and why is it you, Mr. Law Enforcement, standing up with this survey?
Sure. So I'll answer the last part first. Law enforcement tends to be, although we're certainly not the only ones that see and kind of get the emerging technology stuff presented to us in the field, just interacting with the general public as they hunt and fish or trap. So we offered to take the lead on this survey just because we are familiar with the emerging technologies and commonly are the front line as far as the public presenting those questions to us. As far as the surveys conducted, I can only speak to this one. This is the one that I've been most involved in, and I haven't been involved in many other surveys from the division beforehand. However, we did present specifically the trail camera one. We are offered to have that presented or looked over by the kind of a legislative person that conducts similar type surveys or who they contract with, and they approved the use of that as far as making sure it was an unbiased and fairly presented survey. But our social scientist is a professional that obviously that's what he does, and so the need to operate outside of that hasn't been needed. And when we have, at least in this case, it was approved as written.
Wyatt, can I add just a little bit of that? Typically, Austin, with our surveys, we have a huge database of license holders and people that have applied in the big game draws and different ways that we can segregate out people, our user base. We take, when we do one of these surveys, we don't send them to everybody. We take a random sample of that database and send it out. I don't know how many this one went to, Wyatt.
So
Usually it's several thousand.
Yeah, roughly 10,000 for the trail camera one, and I believe we were about 8,000 for the emergent technology one, the one we did in March.
Okay, so that's a random sample of our license and permit holders. We usually go back 3 to 5 years to identify those people. We take the random sample and then we make sure we get a sample size that is statistically valid. Typically, that's around 30%. Is where we try to get to. And all of our surveys that we've done have kind of met those standards to have that statistical validity, which makes us feel like we're getting good information or real information from the public. So does that help?
And just to correct that number, is 6,000 for the emergent technology survey and 10,000 it was sent out to you for the trail camera.
One more question, Wyatt. Excuse me. Can you define the definition as used in the survey of the difference between using a trail camera for scouting versus using a trail camera for hunting? I know there was some confusion in the survey, at least there is in my mind. Can you define that, how law enforcement sees that?
So as far as the survey goes, and I wouldn't say that the survey is written with the law enforcement opinion necessarily as a defining factor, but basically, are you using the camera during the season? And you're right, I don't believe it's defined in the survey, but if you're using the camera during the season in which you have the tag for, that would be during hunting. If you're using it to try to kind of categorize animals preseason, before your tag goes into effect, that would be more defined as a scouting.
Okay. Additional questions from the RAC? What about any questions from the public? Go ahead. Please, if you just state your name and then ask the question into the mic.
My name's Blake Stevens. I was just curious if this survey was only done to members that have like drawn a tag recent years, or would it just be the general public, anybody?
Yep, so it was, we randomly selected either 6,000 or 10,000 from people that have applied for big game hunts in the last 5 years.
So just general public wasn't necessarily involved in this.
Right.
Okay.
And that was more so geared towards because it's the regulation of trail cameras is proposed more for the take of big game and not necessarily the recreational use of a trail camera.
Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead, Tammy.
I was just going to ask, I know before, and maybe this is just your presentations before on what the diagrams are on the public input. Is that something that you can post now, or do we need that at all, or?
So I don't have that for this agenda item. I'll have that for the next one when it's an action item, and I'll give you the number of comments we received and how those broke down.
No, Wyatt, you could, you have all the charts and graphs from your survey results. If we wanted to see any of those, you have those available. So Tammy, if you have specific questions, Wyatt can help us out on those. Okay.
Braden, I've got a question.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, how can you possibly enforce this?
As far as how it's proposed in the big game rule?
Yes.
Yeah, so we can
Nick,
discuss that in the next item.
Yeah, let's save that. This is just the information. We're not proposing anything yet. That's the next agenda item. So we'll hold on to that question until we get to the action item.
All right, thank you.
All right, I think we should go ahead and move into the action item. I went to the RAC, to the public, back to the RAC, but let's get to the action item and then we can have additional questions. So
let's let Nick ask his question or maybe have Wyatt summarize what the proposal is.
yeah, I think if we have Wyatt kind of summarize it, and then I don't know if you want to go ahead and share the results, and then we'll go into questions and comments. Sorry, Kobe, not Nick. Thanks.
While they're switching, does anybody have a comment?
At least the room's spacious, so there's that.
Kobe, if you want to just give us again, just a brief summary, just as a reminder to everybody in the public that's here, we should have all watched the presentations at this point. We should come to the meetings having watched those, so we don't need you to go in great detail, but if you could just kind of give us a quick summary, and then we'll open it up to questions from the RAC.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So some of the things we did is first we talked about why we're here recommending big game rule changes. So there are a couple things that lead to big game rule changes or why we change rules in the first place. And I think it's important to remind the public and everybody that one of them is to comply with board direction. You know, in this rule change specifically, you'll see a recommended change to ask that all hunters have a bison permit, that they take a shot placement course. Right. And that came from a discussion with the board about concern over wounding loss. So the division, we saw a lot of wounding loss in the Book Cliffs 2 years ago. We brought that up to the board, and then they came back and helped us with that and said, well, then let's implement a shot placement. Another reason why we may have a rule change is to comply or align with current state law or a mandate or a request. So one of the things we'll talk about in just a second is a proposed season on transmitting trail cameras, right? And that's to comply with House Bill 125, which there was some talk of legislation last year. They came back and the legislature came back and said, we're not going to do this, but we're going to give you the authority to do it, and then we're going to ask that you take something through the public process. So when we talk about trail cameras, this is complying with a request that is now in statute. And finally, there are some things on our public surveys, some things that we know have cleanup, and there are several of those throughout. So just to get into this, some of the things that we're recommending. So the first one is just antler elk control permits. We defined those and said that those permits are not valid on CWMUs. An antler elk control permit is a permit you can obtain in certain areas across the state, where if you have a buck or a bull permit, you can buy one of these permits and hunt a cow elk at the same time. We defined and prohibited the use of night vision devices for hunting big game. We use the definition in statute for trail cameras, and then are recommending to restrict the use of transmitting trail cameras during all big game seasons. After some of the survey data, we clarified that muzzleloader is, in Utah, hunting with a muzzleloader means a weapon that both the powder and the bullet are loaded from the muzzle. There are some new muzzleloaders where you load the bullet in the barrel, and then the powder or charge is actually in a cartridge that you load on the other side. And our hunters did not like or support that. We just clarified that national wildlife refuges are closed to hunting unless declared open by the managing authority. And then we're asking for some help in the draw process. You remember last time we came around, one of the requests for several years has been to have permit numbers available, at least proposed permit numbers available during the draw. And Lindy's presentation was on how we do that and said we'd have to bring forward a few more things to help streamline the draw process. So right now, if you can put in for buck and doe pronghorn, you can put in for bull and antlerless moose or ram or ewe bighorn, but only if you don't draw the male of that species. So we're asking to remove that restriction to help streamline the draw process so that you could essentially put in for and hunt both male and female pronghorn moose and sheep in the same year. Now that's highly unlikely, especially for moose and sheep, but that will help streamline the draw process. We talked about this at the beginning, but we're asking that all hunters that have a bison permit have to take a shot placement or read a shot placement article on bison. And then clarified that handgun, archery, muzzleloader, shotgun permits, much like in any weapon permit where you could hunt with a bow, these are not archery permits, and so they're not valid on extended archery units. Finally, there is a youth hunt that has some overlap with the general season archery, any bull hunt. And we're asking that you remove the requirement for hunter orange from those archers during that overlap. We just don't feel like there's the quantity of hunters on the landscape to require that. We have other exceptions to hunter orange on very limited hunts, once in a lifetime CWUs. And we felt like this fell more in that realm. And that's it. Those are the major changes that we're recommending.
That's it. You sure
That's
you don't
all.
have any more you want to throw?
Couple small ones.
Okay. Thank you, Kobe. Appreciate that. Just as a reminder of how the process will work, and then maybe a couple suggestions. We'll do questions from the RAC, then questions from the public. Those questions, just stand at the mic, state your name, ask your question. Then we'll move to comments from the public. For a comment, we need a comment card. So if you haven't filled one out, please do, although we've got a bunch of them, which is great. That's why we want the public here. And then we'll go to comments from the RAC. I think what we should do on this agenda item, there are a lot of items. I think we want to have questions and comments about the entire agenda, but when we come to motions, let's pull out individual subjects and then once we go through all motions we want to address, we'd pass the remainder as presented. But for questions and comments, let's just hit everything in this agenda item. One additional comment, I know that kind of overshadowing everything is the discussion on trail cameras. That's where we've got most of our feedback, and that's where most of the discussions come in. But there are some other big changes occurring in there. So I would hope that we don't get lost on one subject and we keep everything in mind. So with that said, I'll open it up to questions from the RAC. Oh, yeah. Kevin, you want to summarize the public input?
Yeah, we only had 20 people comment directly on this for the southern region specific, which I was surprised. I thought it would be more. Of those 20, 45% strongly agreed. Most of the comments were geared towards cameras and the proposal there with trail cams. So the largest percentage of any single percentage was 45% that strongly agreed, an additional 15% that somewhat agreed. And then we didn't have anybody in the middle on this, either agreed or didn't agree. On the disagree side, we had 40%, 25 strongly disagree, and 15% that somewhat disagreed. So it was essentially a 60-40 split.
Thank you. Now we'll open it up to questions from the RAC.
I'll ask my question again, Braden.
Yeah, thank you, Nick.
I agree with the trail camera proposals. I'm just still curious how we are to possibly enforce those.
So with it written as is, it's not a whole lot different than how our baiting law is currently written, in that it's unlawful to take big game over bait. What's the obligation for us is to prove the intent of the hunter hunting over that bait, or the individual placing that bait. It'd be the same thing with the cameras, in that we'd have to prove the intent of that camera. So there certainly are challenges associated with it. Some of that's the reason for that is how it's kind of written and defined in code. But nonetheless, we're experiencing something similar with bait, but there certainly are challenges that come with how it's written.
Go ahead.
So in the proposal, there are several exemptions there, and in your previous RAC meetings, they talked about the use of trail cameras for research, but that you mentioned that wouldn't be covered because we're only looking at potential take. And would the same be the same for law enforcement as well? Because we use trail cameras for both of those things on the forest, and would be concerned about their use during the hunt.
Absolutely. As you read how we've defined this, it does tie it back to the take of big game. So our, the division's authority comes back to wildlife management. And so when we write a rule to regulate, we write it to regulate as respect to the authority that we have, which is over hunting methods or take. And so a law enforcement officer, a private landowner using these on his private land to monitor for trespass, none of that would constitute take unless they were also using it to hunt with.
So you would see that we needed an exemption for research or law enforcement? Feel like it's already in there.
I feel like it already qualifies. Yeah.
Go ahead, Verlund, and then Jean.
So if I have a camera out there, but I don't have a tag, am I legal during the hunt?
Yes. And so let me rephrase this. The way that it's written, it's take, aid in the take, or attempt to aid in the take, right? So if you have a camera out there and you're not sharing those photos or giving the information to somebody that has a tag, then absolutely.
How will you enforce that?
Well, look, I don't want to step too much on Wyatt's toes or steal his thunder because he loves this. So, but what I will tell you is that, like with any law, how many of you came here on the freeway? And how many drove a little bit over? Yeah, I know how Tammy drives. So, no, in all reality, Berlin, there are going to be some folks that get away with this like there are with any law in the books. And we're going to catch some of the egregious offenders. It can be hard, and we catch them every year. It's amazing. Sometimes it's another offense that leads to looking into something a little deeper. And then all of a sudden we have a bunch of trail camera photos that we know came off of a transmitting camera. We know the time, and we know that animal was taken because we've seized it. So it's hard, and I know they're going to make some cases. Now, Wyatt, you probably ought to make sure I didn't say anything incorrect there. So
He's on point.
thank you.
Okay, as far as law enforcement goes, can you tell a transmitting trail camera from any other kind of trail camera?
Yeah, most will have some sort of antenna that's attached to them, or some sort of wiring system if they're running a transmitter up a tree to get service or something like that. So yeah, typically you can tell the difference between the two.
Go ahead.
To follow up with that, Wyatt, on what Gene said, the way I read it is a trail camera that is capable of transmitting would be illegal, even if it's not in service. Is that right?
Correct. We didn't want the loophole to say, well, I didn't have it set up to transmit, and leave that obligation up to us to prove. So any camera that's capable of transmitting would be prohibited during that time frame.
Go ahead, Tammy.
So I'm assuming we're just talking public land though, right?
Sure. Yeah. No, we're not. Because these are public wildlife, and because of the survey data, we came back and we're making this recommendation for hunting big game. So if you're hunting wildlife on private land, if you're hunting wildlife on public land, the regulation is the same.
So my question is also in reading the materials, the exemptions were active livestock management and those kind of things, or trespass, right, on the transmitting cameras?
Yes, Tammy, and that's a really good point. We wanted to make sure that a private landowner felt like they could still monitor their program, monitor their agriculture operation, and do the things that they needed to do. And so we listed those specifically.
Okay.
Right.
Now, Covey, to follow up on that exemption, that means if a deer walks by her trespass transmitting trail camera, she is still legal as that agricultural producer to harvest that animal, correct?
I'm going to let Wyatt answer that question.
So our intention on this would not be to address incidental occasions. However, if we do see that abused or find that was the facade that was used to justify the use of the camera, we'd address that differently. But however, we wouldn't want to punish someone that this intention was not that.
Okay, so I do not have a transmitting camera. I did have a regular camera and it was just a security camera, but it was in one of our fields that Jason's approved us on, agriculture. And we had some strange vehicles. Well, come to find out, they came in and shot a buck in the middle of our hayfield, and we didn't know anything about it till a week or two later and saw it on the trail camera. But everything's posted, they shouldn't have been there, blah, blah, blah.
Better get transmitted.
Yep.
Go ahead, Austin.
I have some more questions. 2 parts, and they're connected. Why is it July 31st and not August 1st? I don't understand pulling a camera July 30th as opposed to there's probably a reason there, and I don't understand it. The second part to that is spring bear. Does that still allow a transmitting trail camera for the harvest of spring bear if you have a bait permit?
Okay, so the first one, the reason why is simple, and that is just that you can have a permit in hand for a big game animal August 1st. So that's just the distinction there. And so it went from, so we cut it off the day before you could have a permit in hand, and went all the way through the last day that you could be hunting a big game animal. Now, I understand that the majority of hunts happen August 15th, August 20th through the end of October. Right, but there are still some limited entry buck hunts, bison hunts, and other things that occur later. And there is the possibility of hunts occurring up to August 1st. On the second question, in the survey that we did, you'll notice that we put these same, or recommending to put these same dates in the cougar and bear rule. And the reason for that wasn't to preclude cougar and bear. The reason for that was because you could have a spot and stock cougar permit or a bear permit and be using it for big game. And so we added it to those 2 rules, only overlapping that same time period for big game. In the survey, the sentiment wasn't overwhelming, or there wasn't support to regulate this for cougar or bear. And so we're following that line. And if you had a spring bear tag, you absolutely would be able to still use a transmitting camera.
Covey, I had a question along that line. That some of the feedback I've received, I think all of us have, is on a concern from houndsmen, particularly cougar in the winter. And so the question would be, I don't know what percentage, but an overwhelming percentage of big game hunts for antlered animals, not antlerless, but antlered animals, are done by December 1st. Had we looked at doing December 1st as the cutoff, so you're, particularly those guys chasing cats can use cameras?
Yeah, and Braden, we did. We toyed with the notion of, because you're right, the majority of hunts are over by then. We're talking, there's a few limited entry deer hunts and a few bison hunts, and then our antlerless hunts, which I honestly, I mean, a transmitting camera could be helpful on an antlers hunt just to know if the animals are there or aren't there, right? But it's not like they're picking the cow with the biggest ears. So we just felt like we'd just be consistent across the board. Whether that's right or wrong, that's the recommendation. So just consistent across all big game hunts.
Okay,
and that's why we went with that.
So I may have a statement on this, but let me ask a question. Is there a concern with having a transmitting camera on antlerless hunts? Because the goal of antlerless hunts is to harvest animals. That's why we have them. So would there be a concern with aiding harvesting on antlerless hunts?
Okay, so probably the answer is probably less of a concern, right? Because the goal is to harvest. And there's still a strong sentiment from a lot of sportsmen in the survey, a fair chase sentiment of what it means to go out and have fair chase. And the feeling of, is a transmitting camera, like whether it has antlers or not, does that dive into that fair chase?
I'll ask you a hard one. why did the division not decide to restrict regular internal storage trail cameras as part of this recommendation? Was that directly from the survey, or why was that not included?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is yes. We had the majority of our support, 51%, as compared to 33% that oppose, came on transmitting cameras.
They supported internal 51%.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Let me read this slide really quickly and then I'll answer. The numbers, there's so many percentages and numbers. At the end of the day, we had support, a lot of support to regulate transmitting cameras and less support to regulate non-transmitting cameras. There is one slide that can kind of confuse this. At the end of the survey, we did ask if the public was supportive of a Nevada-style ban, which is both under a season. And on that slide, there was support. But if you look at the individual questions of, do you support regulating internal storage? It was yes. Do you support regulating or internal storage? The answer was no. Do you support regulating transmitting? The answer was yes. And a little bit of confusion from the question about Nevada's rule. But overall, we felt like we teased this out, and this is what we had the most support for.
And one more, probably for Wyatt. Have internal storage trail cameras or transmitting, but have they helped you in a prosecution from other sportsmen, from other individuals submitting trail cameras? Is there any validity to you guys to having trail cameras on the landscape to help you in your investigations?
Correct me if I'm a little bit off topic here, not answering your question, but some of the ones I can think off the top of my head are when blinds or other cameras are stolen, we have trail camera photos of the individual stealing those items. And so it has helped us in that type of case. As far as trail cameras being on bait and then dogs running through bait, we have photos of that as well. So there are instances where public use or our use of trail cameras has aided in identifying individuals or improved that a crime did occur. Did that answer your question adequately?
Yeah, I think so. I was more so thinking of specific animals, like trophy animals. Hey, I have a picture of that animal, after the season was over, and then it shows up dead, things like that.
Yeah, I can't think of any specific examples, but it would not surprise me in that we have someone claiming they shot a deer on, let's say, the extended, but we have a photograph of it off the extended, for example. It would be likely.
Go ahead, Gene.
As I understand it, you don't want transmitting trail cameras during that big game season, but it'd be all right for the spring bear hunt.
That's how it's currently written, Gene.
If the reason for not having transmitting trail cameras is an ethical one, it should apply clear across the board.
Any other questions from the RAC? You said one more on your last one, Austin. Go ahead.
I got another one. Question about the sale or purchase of trail camera images. How does that work with guide services and finder's fees, which are way popular in Utah? And for those who don't know what that is, it's where an outfitter will pay an individual who finds an animal or scouts an animal. Might not always be a live photo, maybe a trail camera that he ran in the spring or summer. How does that work? Does it span all expanse of time, something you saw last year, this year? And do we have concerns about that?
So first of all, if that data was collected by a trail camera, and the way it's written is photos, location, time, so any media, it would be illegal to buy or sell the media. Now, obviously, if you're a guide and you're running trail cameras and you're being paid for your guiding service, that's a different thing. But it would impact finder's fees if the data was collected by a trail camera, and that's what was shared. So one of the things that we were asked to do, and one of the sentiments was that the public wanted us to regulate the number of trail cameras on the landscape. And that is something that when we looked at it, is close to impossible to do. When we realized regulating the number, because I may have a tag and I'm allowed 5, but then I put 5 out for my wife and 5 out for my son and 5 out for my daughter, and all legal, right? It was just something that was impossible to regulate. So the other question we asked in the survey was, how does the public feel about buying and selling of these images for take? Again, this isn't wildlife photography. It ties it back to take. And there was strong sentiment to not allow that. And so we hypothesized that if the incentive isn't there to buy or sell those images, it may reduce the incentive to go and put out 50, 60 cameras to try and capture those images and sell that for a big finder's fee. So that was some of the rationale behind that. The other part of this is there are, and I found one the other day at websites where you can go on and buy a picture of an animal, and that picture will get you a picture of the animal, the time it was taken, and the location of where that is. And if you have a tag in that unit, you pay $60 or whatever it is, and then you're off to hunt the animal with all that information. You know, there's a pretty strong sentiment that you should do your own work. And that's where the whole non-transmitting camera thing came back to, is you got to put it up, you got to walk in, you got to check it, and you can't buy those images. So it would affect that.
Covey, was there any discussion about identification on these trail cameras? For example, on our traps, there is a specific identification number on each trap that is in the ground. Was there any discussion about something like that to make that happen so that you could identify who that individual was and put out there? And if so, what was the sentiment on that?
You want me to take this one, Wyatt?
I can add to it.
Sure. Yeah, we did talk about it, and it was just one more registration program that we'd be running where we had you come in, register everything, go out to the field, and it just, there could be some benefit to it, and it's also like, just how much is enough, and that's, what would you add to that, Wyatt?
So the only thing I'd add to that is the reminder that this is tied to take, so only a camera that's on the mountain that's attempting to take wildlife or aid in the attempt to take wildlife would be something we'd enforce. And so a camera for photography reasons, we would not regulate that camera and therefore wouldn't have a reason to place a registration number on it. All trapping devices are regulated by the state, and so we have that ability to require that on trapping devices. But the way the rule's written, with the authority we have as far as cameras go, there could be any number of cameras not registered but still legal on the mountainside. And so the effectiveness of that probably wouldn't be effective as far as regulating how many or who's using cameras.
Go ahead.
Covey, the rule, the way you've proposed the changes, do we have an expectation of what this will do to success rates, to harvest, to the future? Or am I looking too far forward on this?
Yeah, no idea. I mean, I would like to give you an answer. I assume that it could impact probably not the number of animals, probably not it may impact individual animals of extreme quality in some areas. It probably won't have any impact on success rates.
Covey, I'm going to have you back up just a moment. I think that it's important for both the RAC and the public to understand the process of how this first came about. A lot of the comments that we have received from the RAC is the division is doing this, the division is doing this, the division is doing this. And obviously we see that a lot when it comes to something that people are very passionate about. can you give us, I know you touched on it at the beginning, but give us a little bit more background from the legislative side that's coming to you guys so that the public knows that this is not Covey coming and saying, hey, we want to take your trail cameras away type of a feeling.
Yeah, thanks, Riley. I actually appreciate that. One of the things that I would say is that there's a couple things. First of all, I'm the face of a lot of recommendations, which gets me a lot of love on social media, and I read all the comments and appreciate them. So, but whenever we do this, this rule was written by a team, so a team of people along with our Attorney General's office representatives, and we're not always perfect. We may miss things, we may get it wrong. But there's a lot of people that work on this, even though I'm the face. The other part about where this came from. So there was a strong sentiment last year and during the legislature that this is one of the things that the legislature wanted to address. Right? They wanted to address baiting of big game, and they wanted to address trail cameras. And they walked it all the way down, and we're going to address both. And a lot of the public comments at that time were, let us address this. Please take this through our public process and let us address this. So the public was asking the legislature to send it through the way that we make wildlife rule. And to their credit, they backed up and said, okay, if you want this to come through your public process and you're willing to address it and you're willing to have some rules about how we use trail cameras, we'll let you do it. And so when they passed House Bill 125 of last year, in there was the direction for the division to take this through our public process. And I think really what the legislature was trying to do is listen to the public and do what they'd asked. And then we're trying to do what that requires us to and give public opportunity to comment on this. And I'm not into finger pointing, so this isn't it's not them versus us or anything like that, but this is our chance to comment on this, to get it the best we can in the way that, as a hunting public, we want to see it.
We're fortunate we have Riley Peck here tonight, who's our legislative liaison. Riley, do you want to add anything to that on how this evolved during the legislative session last year?
Actually, I think Covey did a pretty good job on describing that.
You don't have to be so surprised when you say that.
No, I think that his point in that as we were talking through this bill and you saw this process play out at the legislative level, it became very apparent that there were a lot of passionate feelings and there were a lot of desire to have a say and not just an all-out ban on this. And I think the legislative body did a very good job in listening to the public and still had a desire at seeing something regulated along the lines of trail cameras. And so in their effort to allow both of those scenarios to take place as part of that bill, as Covey mentioned, it did send this to the Wildlife Board and asked the division to make a recommendation before this next 2022 session that is coming up. And so this is part of that directive. We do have to report back to the legislative body on what the RACs and the boards came up with. But as Covey said, it was heavily desired that they go through, and they backed it up as there were a lot more voices coming and saying, let the public have a say in the camera portion of it all. So.
Thank you, Riley.
Go ahead, Austin.
One more, Covey. Where this muzzleloader rule is open as well, would this be the time? We've had a lot of comments about restricting variable power scopes again on muzzleloaders. Would this be the time to make that change?
Yes, if there's a desire to do that, the rule is open right now. And so that would be an appropriate thing to address if there's a desire to do that. But you got to promise that's your last question, Austin. No, I'm just kidding.
If we're moving on from trail cameras, I've got a question on the antlerless or the female permits for once in a lifetime and antelope. I'm really glad this is being addressed. I had a situation with my daughter last year with antelope. She had a buck tag and couldn't put in for the doe tag, and so we ran into that. It seemed odd at the time, so this is great. But my question is on the once in a lifetime. Did the division look at making once in a lifetime female under the same rule that they are once in a lifetime? So you can only apply for one once in a lifetime permit. And the reason for that, and maybe I'll get into my comment more, but those are so limited that the demand for those seems like if we could spread them out as much as possible, maybe there's some benefit.
No, that's a really good point. And first, I should apologize to Austin because he always has a lot of great questions and puts me on the spot quite a bit. And I actually do appreciate it. But Braden, to answer your question, so as you know, cow bison and mountain goat, their nanny goat are both once in a lifetime permits. And then when we did cow moose and ewe bighorn, we wrote it differently. And the rationale is simple, and that is just that there's not very much sexual dimorphism between a nanny goat and a billy goat or a cow bison and a bull bison, but there's a lot of sexual dimorphism between a bull or a cow moose, and the same thing goes with the ewe or ram bighorn. And so that's why we went with what we went with. We felt like there's enough difference there between the female and male of those species that it wasn't the same experience. Right or wrong, you're right, they may be highly desired, but that's why we wrote it the way we did.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Gene.
On that topic, the doe antelope is a bonus point. There is doe antelope is a preference point, or aren't moose and ewes bonus points?
They are. So they're managed more like limited entry with a 5-year waiting period after you draw, and on a bonus point system, not a preference point system.
I got one more.
You can't keep saying one more.
This is for Wyatt, though. Kobe's out. I have another one. There's another one. Wyatt, would it be easier from law enforcement for the division to enforce a total trail camera ban during a season than just transmitting only?
As far as how the rule's written now, like, let's say we included internal storage and how the trail's written now,
Yes.
probably would not be easier. The reason I say that is because 8% of the population's using transmitting trail cameras. So if we limited it to just transmitting trail cameras being banned, we'd be investigating potentially 8% of the trail cameras on the landscape. That leaves 92% of the population's using internal storage trail cameras, which again, if those are on the landscape, they're not necessarily illegal, and we would be tasked with identifying the use of those cameras. So if we banned all trail cameras, we'd have to define the use of essentially every trail camera on the mountain.
Go ahead, Gene.
Is that 92% of the hunting population or 92% of the total population?
It's 92% of the population that uses trail cameras. So there's only about 40% of the population that actually uses trail cameras. And so 92% of that 40% would be using internal storage trail cameras.
And the 40% is of hunters, not general population.
Yes, correct. We just surveyed hunters. So there's additional people using trail cameras that we didn't survey or that wouldn't fall into those numbers. Thanks, Kobe.
Chuck.
So do we know how many people would, if we did a Nevada-style regulation, how many people who are just using trail cameras for wildlife viewing would be affected by that? Because I'm assuming you'd have to prove whether they were hunting or not. Again, do we have any idea of what proportion of the public?
So Nevada's bans all trail cameras.
Yeah.
It doesn't tie it to take. So they're slightly different in that the use of trail cameras is banned completely, whether you're researching, photography, whatever. And so that would be a little bit different than our recommendation. So it'd be kind of hard to make that comparison.
So if I wanted to put a trail camera out and I'm not using it for hunting, I can do that.
As the rule's written right now in
Right now.
Utah, you could.
Are we ready to move on to questions from the public? Okay. Questions from the public. And just a reminder to state your name and then ask your question. And we'll do comments after the questions.
Troy Justinson, Sportsman Fish and Wildlife. Kobe is the current rule that's being recommended. Would it allow livestock producers to use cameras to, say, like a sheep producer to locate a lion or a bear?
So in a depredation situation,
Yes.
currently, that would probably be precluded the way that it's written, but we're not opposed to an amendment to allow that in that situation.
So you would allow it then, is what you're saying, that we could come up with an amendment?
Yeah,
these rules.
if the RAC wanted to make an amendment to that to allow the use of a transmitting camera in a depredation situation for a producer, we would not be opposed to that.
Thank you.
There's a lot of public here for one question. Any other questions from the public? Okay, let's go to comment cards then. First, we'll have Tim Prince, and then following that will be Paul Niemeyer.
My name is Tim Prince. I just represent myself and I guess the average Joe hunter. I run cameras, and until this year, I didn't know that there was a problem until the HB 295. I think it was a pretty good compromise to bring it to a RAC situation where public comment could be made. I think the proposals that I viewed online regarding the surveys and everything that goes along with that were very well done. And I think it was very representative. The results were very representative of I think, a lot of the hunters' sentiment. I would ask that as far as the trail cameras go, that the proposal be accepted as is. I think it's well written and well defined. Without any, I think no amendment is necessary, and we just need to. And I think it's a good compromise as far as when it comes to transmitting versus regular trail cameras.
Thank you, Tim. While Paul's coming up, let me just remind, it's a 3-minute comment for public, 5 minutes for organization. And then also, if you don't have a comment card here, please fill one up and come on up. There's not as many comment cards here as there are people in the room, so I want to make sure you have your chance to speak if you'd like.
I'm Paul Niemeyer. I represent the local chapter, Sphere Wayne chapter of SFW. What I'd like to talk about is probably trail cams, but when you get people together now, sportsmen or even people that aren't hunters, the thing that is a real concern is the low deer numbers. That seems where it all starts, and then it winds up everybody blaming why they are. But the real problem is probably about technology these animals, whether it be in cameras or our equipment. These animals just can't adapt to what we put on them. And trail cameras are probably the worst, in my opinion. I had a friend that grew up on Scott Tag 2 years ago, and I took him down there. And I was absolutely shocked at the amount of trail cams, and not just on the water holes. You'd see tracks going into a patch of trees somewhere, and then you kind of go in there and see what's going on. Well, and then there's a pile of apples with a camera on it. I think it's just gone beyond even something that's reasonable. And we're getting a black eye as sportsmen from these trail cams especially. People are saying, well, all you guys do is just take out cameras and take pictures of the animal and you go kill them. So they're looking at us is not sportsmen anymore. They're looking at us as killers. And a lot of these people have said we need to take and put the hunt back in hunting. And the most of the sentiment that I'm getting, and I'm out and about probably as much as about anybody, is are against trail cameras of any kind. I just had in fact, it was just a minute ago, a guide actually called me, and he said, do anything to stop the trail cams. And they're talking about all of them, not just, we talk about the ones that you can vision on your phone and stuff, but they're all hurtful. And they really select against trophy animals, especially when you can go and when you're out scouting, you've got like elk, early season elk hunt, it's still pretty hot then. And you've got some time in the morning and some time in the evening, go look, but you can't cover a lot of ground. But if you got a trail cam and all these drainage and stuff, you can find a trophy bull or whatever, and then you target that drainage until you finally have a really good chance of taking that animal. So we need to rethink this a little bit, and it's going to be really hard to reel us back in. I mean, everybody's got trail cameras. There's so many of them out there, but our recommendation is to outlaw all trail cams. And now I know the Northern RAC met, and I think they did that kind of recommendation also, but then they put a mirrored Nevadas, which I think is the 1st of August to the end of January. All trail cams are prohibited with the exception of livestock owners that are using them for the stuff that they're doing, whether it be depredation or maybe if they've got a pond that they want watching the water on to see if, it's getting dry, things like that, legitimate reasons. But anyway, that would be our recommendations: outlaw all trail cams. And I guess we can put a date on it from, August 1st to the end of January. That would be a decision you guys could make. But there's a real strong sentiment against trail cams in general. Thank you.
Troy Justinson, representing Sportsman, Fish and Wildlife. We support the division's recommendations, which is basically limiting the use of transmitting cameras on the date specified, and also prohibiting the use of night vision and thermals for hunting big game, with the exception that we put a clause in there that allows these producers, such as sheep producers and cattle producers, whatever, if they've got a problem with the bearer line, that they would be permitted to use those. And speaking to this just a little bit, if you've hunted enough, we've all heard the cliche that you're not going to kill anything unless you get out of camp. You're not going to kill anything at camp. That's not true anymore. And let me tell you a story why. I've got a nephew that's 15, 16 years old. He's sitting in class in Springville, 11:30, bing, spike bull on the manti. Calls his mom, can I get out of school? His buddy gets out of school. They drive up. That bull's still there. They dial him up at 540 yards, and they torch him. I'm proud as punch. I mean, I got to hand it to kids being able to do that. But as proud as I am of them, there's something wrong with that. The problem with these transmitting cameras is when I'm out there as a person, I'm one person, I'm looking at one hillside. I can have multiple transmitting cameras everywhere, and I can be multi-places, kind of like the Holy Ghost, sound right? But that's my problem with this is, and like Paul said back right there, is we've got to put the hunt back in hunting. And it's, it targets big animals. Bottom line, it is one of the most effective tools out there. They're there 24/7, 365. You can have them in trees, dark, whatever. And at the end of the day, you can't kill something if you don't know he's there. And so I'd ask sportsmen just to step back and show a little self-restraint. I'm not calling you unethical or whatever, but if we want to maintain any sort of quality in the state of Utah, we have to show a little self-restraint and start drawing back on some of these technologies because it changes daily, and we got to level back up the playing field. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. After Tanner, we'll have Jed Memmott.
Tanner Carlson, representing myself. I would really enjoy not being able to use trail cameras When I was 13 years old, I remember getting on a horse at 3 in the morning and riding up the mountain and seeing what animals were on that mountain. And it seems like a lot of people nowadays already know what animals are on that mountain. I have friends in southern Utah that as soon as a trail camera picks up a big deer or a big elk, they grid that area, 75, 80 trail cameras. The animal doesn't have a fighting chance. We talk about predators in the state. We talk about the best is when people are complaining that our deer herds are declining, that there's no more big animals in the state. Trail cameras are the problem. We have long distance guns. We have long distance muzzleloaders, bows with the Garmin sights nowadays. I mean, it's getting out of control, and we need to start with something. And I think trail cameras would be the perfect thing. I appreciate the division trying to save our critters, trying to keep hunting going for generations to come. I would really like to see Nevada rule where we can run trail cameras in the spring, but we need to, when we're hunting, we need to be out hunting. We need to get out with friends and family and hike around, get out the spotting scope, get out the binoculars. It's discouraging to see what hunting's come to. I just saw on Instagram the other day, it was actually yesterday, and the post has been taken down, but a guy was going to check his trail camera, and there was a dad and 2 sons that had pulled the memory card and were going to, I guess, throw it away or damage it or something. But it just caused a lot of contention. We don't need that in the state. We're hunters, where we should be all on the same team, especially when we have so many people that are wanting to get rid of hunting in the state. Trail cameras have just caused issues. They have, don't get me wrong, they're fun getting sweet pictures, but they are just more problematic than anything. Thank you guys for your time. Appreciate it.
Sorry, after Jed, we'll have Blake Stevens.
Yeah, Jed Mehmet, representing the Dry Creek allotment for the Oak Creek unit. It's a Grazers Association. Anyway, I wanted to come and just tell us some experiences we've had over the past little bit. And the Oak Creek is a pretty active deer unit at this point, with some pretty good animals, we feel. And what we was experiencing, or what I've experienced, and some of our other ranchers, are some cases of vandalism, and the reason I wanted to tie this back into trail cameras is mine in particular. Well, both of ours in particular had the person who was posting a trail camera at the time that they posted it was committing basically felony tampering with government infrastructure by cutting pipelines, cutting the water lines into our livestock troughs, or into, in one case, was into a collection box. And so I think having the trail camera is almost like enticing some of these, and I don't want to lump anybody into anything. Not all cattle guys hate hunters, and not all hunters, not even all guide services or anything like that is, what I would deem as unethical. But there would be one in particular that I would say, in my opinion, would be unethical. And according to the law enforcement guys that we've talked to, that's the way that they see it too. But and when you're talking about just having, 2 quarts of water a minute to water livestock and to water the game in the area, the importance of having that infrastructure intact and operable is paramount, especially in this extreme drought situation that we have. The grazers have a grazing plan at the first of the year. They coordinate that with all the federal agencies that we run with. And then if something happens in the one case where they cut the line going into the box, they'd also plug the box and had so the water couldn't go down the pipeline. So that ends up having to mess with our grazing plan. And so there's those kind of things. That was another recommendation that I would want to say is that, if guys are catching, you take pictures of deer on these trail cams. We take pictures of everything else that moves on trail cams. And so in that process, I was also, I guess as retaliation for me going to authorities, the individual that did this had taken some pictures of me, one of them taking a leak, and to put that on social media. And maybe some in the room have seen it. Maybe some in the room have seen the one of me throwing rocks at his trail camera or whatever. But so there is some abuse, and I think that ties specifically to the trail cams being enticing people to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do, to go get that spot where nobody knows that there's water by, cutting a pipe, putting a hole in the, putting a little pond there for their own selfish benefit. And then just another thing on the survey too. I think the way that the survey was conducted, and I haven't hunted in years, but I think it's a fair survey for the broad range of hunters. But I think as far as the public is concerned, outside of that, I don't get any support of any kind for trail cameras of people that aren't hunted that are nonetheless impacted by the trail cams that are put up there, by hunters and by others, I guess, too. That may not just be hunters, but whether they're getting put on the internet without their permission or things like that. They're just things that impact the total public of those cameras being there. That's what I got.
Thank you, Jed. And the last card we have is Blake. If anybody else wants to comment, hurry and fill out a card and bring it up.
Good evening. My name is Blake Stevens. I guess I represent myself and the cattlemen on the Whiskey Creek, which is the west side of the Oak Creek unit. We've kind of had similar experiences as Jed, of people pulling water out of the infrastructure to water our cattle throughout the valley. And it takes a lot of time and effort on us cattlemen's part to get that back in the line, get the air bled out, everything like that. And then I have also experienced some on my personal level. We have a spring that feeds our irrigation system, and every year I find trail cameras on our private property. And this year they dammed off the spring ditch and made a wallow for the elk and everything. And I've been told by a DWR, or a fish and game officer, that several years back, I can't remember the guy's name, is pretty much good luck. You'll never catch him. You're on your own. And it's just frustrating to always have to deal with that thing. So I'm really in support of a Nevada style law. I think it would help law enforcement be able to not be so laden down with the work effort. If it's a complete ban on all cameras, pretty cut and dry, easy to manage. But again, that's just me. And I feel like the public, I used to be an avid hunter, but got kind of disgusted with all seems like just shooting fish out of a barrel now. It's not much hunting. And I've just had a boy turn 13 and kind of getting him back involved in it. And you can't go up on the mountain without having 20 different cameras pointed in your face. And it just, to me, it's not spot and stock. It's not fair chase. It's just the way it is now. But anyway, thank the board for my time, and that's all.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments from the public. We'll now turn it over to comments from the RAC. Before I do that, I want to just make a couple comments on this. And my thoughts on this. One, I want to thank those that came tonight and appreciate you participating in this public process. This has been an interesting issue. As was mentioned a year ago, there was outcry from the hunters when this legislation was starting to go through, and they said, please bring it through the RAC process. Please bring it through the RAC process. So that's what we're doing. We're bringing it through the process. And now I'm thinking, thanks a lot. Now we have to deal with this. But my comment would be, as I've stewed over this one's been an interesting one for me, because me personally, what I think we should do is different than what I think I should do representing the public. I don't want to be in a position where my personal beliefs and my personal thoughts impact my neighbor, who has a right to have his personal beliefs and his personal thoughts. I think he's just as entitled as I am. However, we have a public process, and this is the public process that the public shows up and voices their opinion. There's surveys, different surveys have gone out, and although that data is great, surveys are hard to really decipher. The process is that we have this meeting for people to show up and speak and show up and address their concerns. And my views on this, and if I were to vote tonight, has changed due to what I've heard here tonight. So I want to thank those of you that have come, and I fully support the division at this point. And in fact, I would be inclined to even look at more restrictions based on the public input that we've had. And so for me, this is how the process is designed to work. And I want to thank you guys for taking the time to be here. And with that, I'll turn it over to comments from the RAC.
I too would like to thank all of those who, I know there weren't a lot of comments online, but I did read through each one of those and I appreciated those. I also appreciate all of you who came and commented and for the questions tonight. This has been something that's not just this last year. This has been something that is what we would refer to as a social discussion, or this is not necessarily something that affects the biology of these animals, but it is something that affects us as individuals, just as the scopes on the muzzleloaders and the long range, and the technology is 100% a social problem or a social decision discussion that we have to take. I do appreciate it coming back through the public processes as well. I'm one of those guys that appreciate this process rather than us just being told from the legislation that this is how it's going to be. We actually have a voice and we get to put that input in. I have, in regards to the trail cameras itself, representing the sportsmen, I have very close friends who are completely on opposite sides of this. Some are completely for it and some are completely against it. And I get that. I have family members who are completely for it and completely against it. And so I think you do see the polarization in this. I, along with Braden's comments, would be inclined to vote maybe differently than I would have earlier. One of the issues that I have that has not been discussed yet is ownership of animals. That's always been something that I've had a hard time with. And I think that when sportsmen go out and they find these big animals, whether it's through a guide service, whether it's an individual, or whether it's just us out having fun, these animals are named, they're nicknamed. Scores are already figured out before they ever hit the ground, and there is a sense of ownership that comes with them, whether it's the amount of apples that's put out or the amount of pictures that have been taken of this particular animal. There is a sense of ownership that comes with that. I struggle with that because this is a public animal. This is a renewable resource that's out there, and as much as I like seeing these animals and like getting pictures myself, we all have that same right as sportsmen, as public, to both view and to harvest if we have that opportunity for that animal. And it doesn't matter how much time or money has been spent looking at that animal. And so that part of it bothers me. Trail cameras themselves, my personal opinion on it, I have, again, a little bit of heartburn because the average Joe may not be able to afford or have the time to go out and set cameras. There are individuals that set multiple cameras, some of them dozens at a time, and that's great. And I envy that time and that the ability to get out and to take those. And I've seen some of those pictures and I admire them. I think they're amazing. But I don't know that is, again, Braden talked about this the last RAC meeting, and it's not about fair, but it is about giving everybody that same opportunity, and I don't know that does that. I also I appreciated the public comments about how the public views this, not just from the sportsmen or the hunters, and that was something that was brought up that was not necessarily shown in the surveys. There is a lot of heartburn out there because people can't go anywhere without a picture taken of them. Some of these pictures are not appropriate for the internet. Some of these pictures are made fun of because they're not appropriate on the internet. I myself have been walking down deep, dark canyons in nature calls, and I have to look around because I know how many trail cameras are out there, and I don't want to be inappropriate on the internet. And I do think that technology has created where we are now in the hunting world in the state of Utah. And it would also be my recommendation that we go even stricter. I appreciate the stance the division has taken, but I would recommend that we go even further and even look at a total ban, at least a seasonal total ban, whether that's from the 1st of August through whenever the RAC so chooses. But I would definitely support that at this point. Thank you.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. First of all, from the Forest Service, we had some comments that have been mentioned at the other racks, and we wanted to make sure they were spread to all the racks. That commercial trail cameras are on National Forest lands can be subject to special use permits. And so I don't know how many of those we do permit because there's so many of them out there, but if they're commercial use, they can be subject to a special use permit. We have cameras that we know have been left in place for 3 and 4 years and haven't moved. They've been on our guzzlers, and they're the same cameras that are there every year. They can be considered abandoned property and removed subject to the Forest Service removal rules. Trail cameras can be damaged when we do our vegetation treatments and have been in some of our prescribed fires. We don't know they're there, and so we can say we don't claim responsibility for that. It's up to you to make sure that your cameras are safe, and we're not responsible for the loss of those trail cameras. So that's one. And two is I'm listening to what we're talking about here for a Nevada style maybe regulation. And my only concern with that is that I'm primarily an archery hunter. I moved to a state that rifle hunting was dangerous in because there were so many. So I switched completely to archery hunting. And so that's great for me because I can scout right up to my season, pull my cameras. But if somebody's season starts in October, that's 2 months that they haven't seen a picture off their trail camera. So they're scouting pretty well. It's maybe worthless for an October hunter who's had to pull his cameras down in August. So that would be my only concern. I mean, for me, it's great, but those are my comments.
Go ahead, Tammy.
Might as well stick my foot in my mouth. I do have to say, I appreciate Troy's comments on allowing an amendment for depredation on livestock. I have the same problem as you guys do we have a lot of BLM, a lot of Beaver County is livestock producers, both on private and public lands. And the general thing that I'm getting from public and not just online or due to this, they hate trail cameras. I mean, and it's basically across the board. And nobody ever tells me they love trail cameras unless they're sending me a good picture of a buck somewhere. But this is one thing that I've struggled with for a long time. I don't own a trail camera other than, on our private property, not even where the animals are. It's our ranch house and stuff that we worry about security systems. I do not like the transmitting ones at all, and especially not during the hunting season. So I would totally support that one. I'm not crazy about trail cameras at all. I bet I don't have a single water trough anywhere that doesn't have 2 or 3 or cameras on it. And they get all kinds of mad when we haul water. Some of the springs are not producing, so Dan knows this. We haul water, and cameras are right in the road where you can't haul water, and so we have a lot of those kind of issues. I would like to put trail cameras up just to see who is doing the vandalizing and that kind of stuff myself. So that's kind of where I sit.
Go ahead, Gene.
I've run into a few places where I've ran into trail cameras. I haven't had the bad experiences that some of you have had with the trail cameras, and but I can appreciate that they are bad experiences. Myself, I've got 3 trail cameras. One I don't have the technology to operate, and the other 2 have taken exactly one picture that has deer in it, and it's 2 does running up the creek bank. And the rest of my pictures are generally foxes and owls. I love that trail camera out there on a fox stand or on an owl burrow. It's really fun, and we get some great pictures. And I think there's a lot of people that use their cameras that way, and we don't want to alienate them. We want it available for everybody, but in truth, it's hard for me because I know that why most of these trail cameras are out. And it's just a tough situation either way. Personally, I think that going with the division's recommendations at this time would be maybe not a good choice, but the best choice.
Thanks, Gene. You ready? We know you have a comment.
I do have a comment. So I'll preface this a little bit. Every night when I go home in my living room, I've got a 260-inch deer that overlooks my kid's piano there. And it was shot in 1924 up Logan Canyon by an immigrant that came to Utah with a lever action that he picked up. He didn't know that deer was there. He had no idea. All they knew, it was big enough you needed to get the hair off the mountain so he could get it stuffed. And he did, by golly. And so my great grandpa shot that deer, and I still have it. And every time I look at that deer, I think, will those days ever be here again? And sadly, they probably won't be for me. It may make me feel jealous of the guys that can afford a conservation tag or a statewide tag to shoot a deer of that caliber. But you know what? I still get just as much happiness going out and hunting a 150 buck as he probably did when he shot a 260 buck. So I think we have to be careful as individuals and as sportsmen to put our jealousy aside. We're all competitive, right? This is a weird sport where you cannot all have success. It's not like shooting basketball or where eventually you're going to make the shot, right? Eventually, you might not have success. And I work in this industry every day where we try to manage results, but there's that element of the unknown is always going to overpower your preparation. And that's the joy of hunting. That is to me, and that is the guys that have commented to me. So a couple of things I want to talk about is no matter what the survey says, I think as sportsmen, agriculture, and the public, we need to come together and say, this is what we're going to handicap ourselves with. This is the funnel we're going to play in. And some of you aren't going to be okay with it, but let's play in it. And let's try to grow some dang animals, because that's what we're trying to do. And if we want more opportunity, we have to either have more animals or less success, right? And I need less success under the current management because we don't have any more animals currently. So a lot of my comments are around, let's create less success. And I know that's frustrating. It's frustrating for me to even say those words, but that is what I feel like we need to do. We need to have the ability to only be in one place at a time, as Troy mentioned. that you can't be everywhere at once with a transmitting camera. I want to see even further. I question the division why we haven't looked at radios and two-way communication. I've said this for years. It's in the Fair Chase model from Boone and Crockett, Pope and Young. You cannot use radios or cell phones to direct someone to game, and yet we ignore it. Right. So if we're going to push trail cameras, let's push it all the way and let's make it as fair as we can. Now, comments on guide services and guys with thousands of cameras, the guides are always going to push the limits. They're always going to be the best because they're getting paid to do that. They're always going to be better than your average Joe Hunter, if you want to call him that. But someone's going to get lucky, right? And it may be you and it may be me. But that is what I want to support in the state of Utah, is that we're going to grow as many animals as we can. We're going to have opportunity for our kids. And you know what? Somebody's going to get lucky, and it might be you and it might be me. So let's give up some stuff. Let's give up scope muzzleloaders again. Let's give up radios and two-way communication, and let's go hunting again. So that's my comment.
Thanks, Austin. Any more comments?
I have a comment.
Okay. Go ahead, Chad. Thank you.
Thank you. I've read all the comments that have come in from the public on this, and I represent the public at large, so I just talked to this with as many people as would talk to me about it that didn't send in comments, just people who don't hunt. And I presented it probably as fairly as I could, stating the issue. And the perception was people are really doing that. That doesn't seem right. And you've had a lot of people here today that have kind of hinted at that. You know, if hunters want to stand the wave that's coming from the non-hunters, they need to do this, and they need to hunt ethically and fairly. And this just rings wrong. These trail cameras do. From a personal standpoint, when I go into the mountains and I go fishing or hiking, I want to get away from technology. We're subject to technology every day. We're being watched and recorded all the time. And the last place I want to be watched and recorded is in the mountains, or when I'm trying to get away. And so I would support a complete ban during the hunting season on all trail cameras.
Thank you, Chad. Gene?
I want to make sure that I comment on something other than trail cameras during this thing, and let's talk about the tags for antelope, moose, and sheep. Now, I understand that you really want to shepherd any points you've got, because you miss a year, doesn't drop you back 1 year, it drops you back several years. With the exception of antelope, it'll only drop you back a year, so that's not a big problem. I don't see a problem there. I appreciate the fact that it does take some points to draw a doe antelope anymore, because it's a fun hunt, and I'm glad to see more people getting involved in it. And I really appreciate that. But I think one moose in a lifetime is enough. There aren't that many moose. On the sheep, there's a hell of a difference between a ewe and a ram when you're talking sheep, at least a mature ram. And so I don't know quite how to look at that, but still there's not that many sheep. So I think one in a lifetime might be okay there too. Once you've drawn that ram, I don't see how that use that important to you anymore. So I'm against that recommendation.
Thanks, Gene. I want to speak to that one while we're on that too. I believe echo what you said, Gene. I'm really glad the division addressed this, but I would like to see it addressed a little bit differently. I don't know why the antelope was ever different than the deer and the elk. I think you should be able to do all of the above. But our once in a lifetime are so limited, and so many people want to hunt those. Last month, we talked about going to the 60-40 split to help move people through the pool. And on our once in a lifetime, that doesn't even hardly help. I mean, that it's chasing a dream. And a lot of that discussion was new hunters and youth hunters. How do they even get a chance in our current system? I would like to see us go to pick your animal on once in a lifetime. If you want to hunt a ewe, then you don't get to put in for any of the other once in a lifetime, and allow those new hunters and those youth a chance to go after that if that's what they choose. I have max points for both the ewe and the cow moose. I'll forego them. I don't want to. I want to do everything, but I'll gladly give those up if we could go that direction. So that's my 2 cents on that rule. Go ahead, Dan.
So similar to the Forest Service, the BLM authorizes commercial guides through special recreation permits, and they're required to have a permit to operate their guide service. And again, with the trail cameras, if they're out on the public landscape for a certain period of time, we can remove those. And the selling of data that has been going on is not an approved act through BLM on public land. And then just touching base on the depredation, I thought that was a really good comment from the public. I think there is a clause in here that talks about agricultural, and it seems like that we would want to, if we do an amendment, make that agriculture producers as well as livestock producers, not only on private land, but on public land to be able to monitor for depredation issues. And to the 2 permittees that talked here, we have the same problem in our field office. We have people cutting pipelines and diverting water, and yeah, they will put a trail camera on those areas, but I think they're going to do that whether there is a complete ban on trail cameras or not. But the reason that we have these pipelines, and a lot of these are funded through Watershed Restoration Initiative, Grazing Improvement Program, is to have good grazing management systems on the public landscape. And that's not only for long-term sustainability of the public land resource, but for habitat improvements. And anytime we have someone that does damage to an improvement like that, it is, it can be prosecuted, but it is really having a negative impact on what we're trying to do out here. And it's not only for grazing management systems, but it's to rotate these permittees through their allotments that will be allowed to have some wildlife feed on the landscape after they're done with their operations. So people that are doing this are really causing the detriment to what they care about most, apparently, which is wildlife. But I think everybody needs to really take that into consideration when you're damaging livestock pipelines or you're damaging fences. We see a lot of people that are grading for sheds in the spring in particular, and they're cutting fences everywhere. And we have cows going all over the place, and the permittee is officially in trespass at that point because they're unauthorized within that pasture or that allotment. It really leaves them hanging out to dry. And it's just not an ethical way to go about business here. If we're looking as a group to promote wildlife habitat on the landscape, I think we all need to work together a little bit better for sure. There's a lot of public and private dollars that go on the ground for habitat improvement projects, for water developments, and this to improve that habitat, not only for the grazers, but for wildlife as well. So I'd sure like to see this cleaned up. And I don't know whether or not a complete ban of trail cameras is going to do that. I really don't think so. I got a lot of friends that use trail cameras, and they don't always hunt. They're out there to get that picture and enjoy the chase. But like it's been said by the other RAC members and the public, it seems like the chase has gone away with all this emerging technology with trail cameras and night vision. And I think we're getting away from what the intent of a lot of hunters is, to have that chase and enjoy that family time and get out on the public land and enjoy it. Thank you.
Okay, Craig Lobb is also Farm Bureau or Ag, and he wasn't able to be here, but he'd sent me a text and just says, here are my thoughts. I think the night vision devices need some regulation, but think the recommended rules are not enforceable. Transmitting trail cameras need to be restricted for at least August through January on public lands and not used for big game hunting on private lands. But that will also be hard to enforce. I think we need to decide if the muzzleloader hunt is going to be a primitive weapon hunt or a single-shot rifle hunt and make rules accordingly. At present, it's a single-shot rifle hunt. Either way, these proposed rules don't make much, if any, difference.
Any other comments? Go ahead, Vernon.
Well, I agree with Craig. There's a lot of things we're talking about, and a lot of them are going to be real hard to enforce. I came in thinking that we ought to keep the trail cams, but how do you enforce whether you're have them for hunting or have them for just viewing? And I don't see how you're going to be able to enforce that even during the hunt. But it's kind of like a few years ago we backed off the shed hunting season, and I live with an avid shed hunter, and she also was law abiding. And when she went out to hunt the area she hunts for sheds, there was a big old footprint, and the sheds were all gone. And so it's, no matter what we do, it's going to be hard to enforce, but I am leaning more towards banning them during these hunting season. These ranchers that talked, I think the trail cams play a part in their problem. I think, like was said earlier, that it's also who they're dealing with. They'll cut that pipeline, whether they put a camera on it or not, and then they know where the water is and can hunt there. Maybe the trail camera could give away who's doing it. I have a similar problem on my winter range. My problem is with slot canyoneers. They've several times chased our cattle up a slot canyon to get them stuck, and they get stuck, whether that was their intention or not. And we can't, if we happen to get a text from somebody and we go, and I mean, it's risky, really hard to get them out. It's dangerous for us. I've got another situation where the slot canyoneers park right on top of my well and bring their little dogs and whatever, and so my cattle can't come into the water trough because of that. So it's quite a problem, and there is no single way to fix it, but I think we need to start. I think, there's too many trail cams, and I don't know how you take care of the two-way radios and that, but we sure appreciate it when we're gathering cows and riding the country to know where the other person is. And, that wouldn't be a deal on hunting, but, there is that problem too. So, I think we probably ought to regulate these trail cams, the transmitting ones, for sure. So I'd probably go at least with the regulations that they're proposing, and maybe even stronger. Thanks.
Go ahead, Austin. And then I do just want to make sure, Bart and Nick, I know it's a little bit difficult when you're online like this, so I want to make sure you guys have a chance to comment if you'd like. So go ahead, Austin, and then we'll give it to you guys if you have a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to make one last comment. I think it's important for I know it's been eye-opening to me through this whole process that we need to learn to control just what we can control. We've tasked Wyatt and his team, let them figure out how to enforce it. And they love their job. There's not quite 50 of them that are full investigative officers, but they're going to do their best. And we sit here as the RAC to make our recommendations to the board. And so I want to just let's control what we can. The divisions made their recommendation, but in the end, this is a social issue. So we look to our wildlife board, and this is all going to rest on them on how they decide. So we can't control every aspect of hunting. We can't control the outcome of everything, but I really want to see as much of this stay in this process and out of the legislative process as possible, where this does relate to hunting and take. So let's push it the way we want it and give it to the wildlife board and trust they'll do what's right. And I've seen the wildlife board. If it's not right, we can make changes in future years. We can roll things back. That happens. And that's the joy of Utah. I was a part the last year and a half of Arizona's trail camera ban, involved in all their public meetings. And our system is much superior to theirs. And they did it all right. An all-out ban year-round for all trail cameras starting this January coming up. And you know what? Everybody's shook their head and said, let's go. We're going to figure out how to hunt and be successful regardless of the rule. But our process has been much better. And let's do what we can to do what we feel is right and go forward with trusting the wildlife board beyond us.
Bart or Nick, either of you want to make a comment?
This is Bart. I generally like the proposal, and I think the discussion has been very interesting, and I definitely concur. So thank you.
Thanks, Bart.
This is Nick. I have talked to several individuals I know statewide that hunt, and they would all be in support of a total ban during the hunting season for many of those types of trail cams. And I've been influenced by the public as well as my fellow RAC members that that's something we ought to recommend. They just ban it entirely during the hunting season. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. I would suggest at this time, I think we've all had a chance to speak. I think we could go ahead and make some motions. I would suggest at minimum, we'd want to have a standalone motion on trail cameras. But then if there's other additional motions, and then again, as I suggested before, at the end, we could make a motion to accept the remainder. So is anyone ready to put forth a motion on trail cameras? Go ahead, Austin. Everyone's looking at you. I don't know why.
I'll try it here. So I move that we modify the recommendation from the division to prohibit transmitting trail cameras and passive or internal storage trail cameras to take or attempt to take or aid in the attempt to take of big game between July 31st and January 31st, and add an exception that agriculture and livestock producers or their agents will be able to use transmitting trail cameras on public or private land for depredation issues. Is that covered?
I think that's good. I think Kevin got that word for word, so. And Riley would second that. Do you want to read us back what you got there? Come on.
Let me finish typing it first.
We've already got the second. I don't know why you're not caught up. We'll give you just a second, and then we'll read it back to make sure we have it. While Kevin's finishing that up, any additional comments or clarification anyone wants there? Go ahead, Tammy.
The agricultural, not just depredation, but livestock and agricultural, right? Did you get both of those in there?
I think.
So let me read you.
Okay, yeah.
The rule already takes care of ag. So this would just be to modify it to account for depredation.
So modify the recommendation to regulate the use of transmitting and non-transmitting cameras. I know that's not how you said it, but I think it covers it. But allow livestock producers to use cameras to take depredating bears and cougars on public and private land. Does that cover it?
Capture it?
Yeah, did you have the dates in there, July 31st through January 31st to mirror that?
From July 31st to January 31st. And just to comment on this, I know we get really concerned about having the wording exact, but we're presenting our proposal to the board. They'll finesse our wording. So as long as we have the theme of what we're trying to capture, that's what's most important.
Okay, so let me read that one more time. So the motion is to modify the recommendation to regulate the use of transmitting and non-transmitting trail cameras, but allow livestock producers to use cameras to take depredating bears and cougars on public and private land from July 31st to January. I need to move those dates up because that sounds like it's only allowing the livestock producers. So to modify the recommendation so that anyway, I'll move those dates up so it applies to the cameras, not to the depredation.
We're good. Gene, did you have a question or discussion?
I have a question, and that's what's going to happen to all these hundreds of trail cameras out there on August 1st.
Same thing that happened in Nevada.
What happened in Nevada?
Some of them came home.
Kevin, this is Nick. Does the way that's wording, is that specific enough for the public to realize that it's a ban on them during that time period? Because it wasn't quite clear to me.
The way
And just to be clear, Nick, it's written for the take. So that's a thing that differentiates this from Nevada is this rule is for the take of, basically it's for hunting, whereas in Nevada, it's an outright ban. So we do have that in the Utah rule.
Okay.
Okay, so give me one more try here, Austin. Modify the recommendation to ban the use of transmitting and non-transmitting cameras for the take of big game from July 31st to January 31st, but allow livestock producers to use cameras to take depredating bears and cougars on private and public land. I think that captures everything that we were wanting to capture in that.
Is there a reason you're naming bears and cougars? I mean, coyotes are no season, but
And we don't regulate coyotes. That's why I limited it to bears and cougars because we don't have any authority over them. So we wouldn't.
Same with wolves then too. No?
Well,
there's no wolves in Utah.
Well, I didn't think about.
Tell that to the northern Utah cattlemen.
Does that capture what we wanted that to say?
That's much clearer to me, Kevin. Thank you.
I would just emphasize that we're capturing our intent, and I think my opinion is that does. The wordsmithing we'll leave up to the experts.
Okay, we have a motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and do a roll call vote on this.
Let me get you your roll here so you can get everybody.
Okay, so Riley. Riley's a yes. Austin?
Yes.
Gene?
No.
Gene's a no. Chuck?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Tammy?
Yes.
Berland?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Chad?
Yes.
Bart?
Yes.
So the motion passes. We have one no. Gene?
9-1.
Do you want to make a comment on the no for the record?
It's just to vote against excessive regulation. I don't think that if they go with what you've just voted on, I don't think that's going to kill anything. Life will still go on. It's just that I'm against the excess regulation.
Thank you, Gene. I think that's great clarification. I can definitely sympathize with that sentiment. So, okay, let's discuss any additional motions we want to make on agenda item. We've tackled the monster. Now I think we can run through the rest. Additional motions on agenda item number 6.
I just wondered if Austin wanted to make a motion on muzzle loaders.
I would love to, rather you were going to make something.
Was Riley getting
I
ready?
want to steal your thunder.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I can always make an amendment to your motion.
So I move that we accept the muzzleloader recommended change that a powder and a bullet must be loaded from the muzzle, as well as modifying Part B to remove a variable or fixed power scope from the muzzleloader muzzleloader rule.
So accept the division's recommendation to the change on the muzzleloader being loaded from the muzzle, and then an additional to remove the scopes from muzzleloaders, correct? Okay, do we have a second on that? Variable scope, variable or fixed scope.
Okay.
I second that.
Okay, so Chuck, we got a motion and a second from Chuck. Any additional discussion on that motion? I think this is, I guess my additional discussion probably should have been in the comments, but I think this is a good motion. I was surprised how many comments I received wanting this to happen. And so it's definitely, there was a lot of public input on this one.
And I'll make a follow-up discussion to that. I was at the RAC meeting in Cedar, I don't remember how many years ago now, when we went from from fixed one power up to variable. And I remember everybody kind of shrugged their shoulders, and that a lot has changed in that 5 or 6 years with muzzleloaders. And me personally, I shot a deer at 600 yards this year on the muzzleloader hunt. And I'm proud of that because I was able to do that legally and ethically, and I made the shot. But would I like to see that go away? Maybe increase opportunity and cut down on success? Yes, sign me up. So that's a part of my reasoning, and a lot of the comments that have come in that says, hey, muzzleloaders have gotten out of hand.
Thank you. Any additional discussion?
Okay, let me read this back.
Not necessarily discussion, just comment on I'm glad to see that the definition has changed on that. I would have thought that the word muzzle loader was enough, but I appreciate that clarification.
All right, you want to read that back?
All right, the motion is to accept the recommendation to require muzzle loaders to be loaded both ball and powder from the muzzle, and also ban the use of variable and fixed power scopes on muzzle loaders.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and vote, and we'll do roll call again. Riley? And then it was Austin?
Yes.
And then Gene?
Yes.
Chuck?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Tammy?
Yes.
Verlin?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Chad?
Yes.
Bart?
Yes.
All right, motion passes unanimously. Any additional motions on this? So the only other one there was discussion on were the antlerless tags. I don't think we had discussion on any of the other rule changes. Go ahead.
I'll make
Austin.
one more discussion on that, Brayden. I think we would be surprised how many people applying for bull moose or ram sheep would opt to take a female with their once-in-a-lifetime points if given the option. So I think in the future, we should look at combining those species, much like bison or mountain goat, rather than pick one or the other, and they're not even at the same application time periods. That would be my comment for the future.
So for me, that would accomplish the same end goal that I would have in mind. So I would agree with that idea.
So can I comment on this, Brayden? Is that okay? If there's changing this tonight this is really complicated because of the 2-point systems involved and everything else. And so what do you do? If somebody has 10 cow moose points, do you add those 10 points to their once in a lifetime bull moose points? Does that put them ahead? So what I'm trying to say is if the RAC wants to make a motion that we investigate this, I'm okay with that. To change this, we could run into issues that I don't think we're prepared for.
And I guess my comment to that is, fortunately, we can't change it. Again, we'll leave that to the experts. But here would be what I would suggest is that we look into it and have the division come back to us with how this would look.
That's a very fair comment, and that's something we could do.
Okay. Go ahead, Gene.
I'll make a motion to just word it like Braden said.
Gene, I've been accused before that I make motions as a chair, and now you're just making it really blatant.
I'll claim the damn motion.
DWR to investigate combining.
So the motion would be to ask the DWR to come back with a proposal for allowing a person to apply for one once-in-a-lifetime permit. So you couldn't apply for a random review.
Could we put that motion in to accept it, as the rest as presented,
included in that?
Included in that?
And what you really want us to evaluate is the combination of female and male moose and female and male.
Yeah, just like buffalo and goat.
Correct.
Yeah.
I'm good with that.
Do we have a second on that?
I can't type that.
Getting a second will give you time to type this up.
Okay, get your second.
I would second that.
Okay, so we have a
Just
second.
for clarification, to accept as presented, with the addition of the division looking into that.
Okay, any additional discussion on that one?
Yeah, are we going to throw dedicated hunter and general deer in on that while we're at it? I know we've talked about that before, combining those.
Hey, don't blow up my motion that Gene made.
Don't blow up my motion. Hold on.
We're still working on wordsmithing this. Give us just a second here.
All right, here's Braden's motion from Gene. Or Gene's motion through Braden to accept as presented with the additional request to ask the DWR to come back with a proposal that would allow an individual to apply for one once-in-a-lifetime species regardless of sex.
And accept the remainder of the presentation as presented.
I have that to
that's
accept
the
as
first.
presented.
Good.
Was that the intent of that motion?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right,
Can I make a comment?
go ahead.
I just want to say, bring on the hate mail. I think I'm proud of this board for stepping up and making some hard decisions on this because I think it's needed. I think we need the ethical stuff coming back into our sportsmen. We know that our herds need it with the drought and everything else coming in. I think technology on top of all of that has been, the demise of our wildlife. So good job, guys.
All right, let's go ahead and do a roll call. Riley?
Yes.
Austin?
Yes.
Gene?
Yes.
Chuck?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Tammy?
Yes.
Verlin?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Chad?
Yes.
And Bart?
Yes.
Okay, passes unanimously. Okay, we've been going 2 hours and 15 minutes. That's as long as some of the other RACs did everything. So, but let's go ahead, let's take a 5-minute that I'm sure will turn into 10 minutes and reconvene.
Come back at 8:20.
8:20. we've got 3 agenda items left. These won't take as much time as agenda item number 6, but let's go ahead and get going. So agenda item number 7, appreciate you being ready, Darren. Again, if you could just give us a brief overview of what agenda item number 7 is, the fur bear season and dates, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So in a nutshell, we're just recommending season dates adjusting for the calendar year for the 2022-2023 fur bear season. We're not changing anything from what the current season is. So we're recommending 6 permits for bobcat per individual with season dates adjusted for the calendar, and then no permit cap for bobcats. And then all other fur bear species just adjusting for calendar year. So pretty straightforward.
Thank you, Darren. Do we have any public comment on this one online?
Oh, yeah. Let's see, on this, there were only 4 people that commented online, so not a whole lot of information. 25%, so 1 of the 4 strongly agreed, 1 of the 4 neither agreed or disagreed, and 2 of the 4 strongly disagreed.
Do we know why they strongly disagreed? Did they
Just the trapping in general, just against
Opposed to trapping?
Yeah,
Okay.
against the activity of trapping.
Thank you. All right, we'll open up to questions from the RAC. Questions from the public? All right, I do have 1 comment card. Looks like there's another one coming. So Kelly, and then actually got 2 other comment cards. So we'll go Kelly and Lane.
Nope, we only got 1. That one's blank.
Okay.
Okay, I'm Kelly Laren. I'm here representing the Utah Trappers Association, and we just strongly agree with the recommendations put forth for next year's seasons and bobcat tag numbers. And we encourage you to continue using the bobcat study as a tool to regulate the numbers.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Lane Abram?
Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm Lane Abraham. I am a member of the Utah Trappers Association, but I'm not speaking on their behalf. I do a lot of trapping, a lot of snaring, and I know this is a little bit off subject, but I would like you guys to maybe explore the opportunity for trappers or snarermen to use processed wild game as bait to go out and set out bait piles to draw coyotes especially, and give us the opportunity to have a different source of bait. Right now, all we can use is, domestic livestock. It's hard to get enough bait to keep an active bait pile going, and I don't see the reason we're not using processed, like out of the packing house there, off haul or whatever. And I would ask that you guys would maybe explore that. And I also, support the division and the Trappers Association's recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lane. Other comments from the RAC? Go ahead.
Well, I guess I have a question for Darren about, I'm not a trapper, but is the rule currently written for non-game species can be used for bait? Is that how the bait rule is?
There's some
worded?
exceptions in the rule, but basically you can't use protected wildlife as bait. And there's some exceptions, dry bones and things like that in the rule, but essentially no. You can use domestic, but you have to prove that it belongs to you, either with a brand inspection or proof of purchase or something like that. And that's the current state of the rule.
All right, well, I'd entertain a motion. Go ahead, Chuck.
I motion that we accept the packet as presented by the DWR.
Okay, we have a motion to accept as presented.
Second.
And a second by Verland. Any additional discussion? Go ahead, Tammy.
I like your idea is there a way to put an amendment into that to look into?
Yeah, we can certainly look into those things. I'm sure, Kevin's got some history. I'm sure there were some reasons why we had concerns about that, but we're always willing to look at and revisit some things, sure.
Or at least follow up
I'd be
with
happy
some
to meet with the
information.
Trappers Association and talk about some of these issues. Yeah, we can certainly do
I
that.
think that'd be helpful.
They just changed leadership, so this would be a good time to sit down with them.
So can I just ask you, I believe you just said you will meet with the Trappers Association and discuss that. So do we want to have that as an amendment to the motion, or the fact that Darren will meet with them and discuss that for the future? Is that?
Are you to be trusted?
I'm not very trustworthy, but I will follow through. I'm sure someone will prod me.
I would be, I don't know, would you be willing to accept that amendment?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so
So-
restate your,
So we would accept the, what do we call this thing? The fur bearer season dates and bobcat permit recommendations with the caveat that the Darren will personally meet with the
Trappers Association.
Trappers
yeah.
Association
Happy.
to discuss the use of other bait, processed game meat. Yeah.
in Berlin, your second still stands? Okay. Additional discussion? All right, let's go ahead and vote. Riley apologized, but he had to step out. He had another engagement he had to go to, so. Austin?
Yes.
Gene?
Yes.
Chuck?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Tammy?
Yes.
Verlin?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Chad?
Yes.
And Bart?
Yes.
Passed unanimously. Thank you. Agenda item number 8. Darren, again, if you can just give us a brief
Yeah,
overview.
quick summary. So as I'm sure you all remember, in July, we just did Cougar recommendations, but we also, the board approved a new recommendation cycle. So we'll be doing Cougars now in December. So our recommendations last year ended in July 2022. So what we're doing tonight is recommending season dates for the next year. So beginning it ended in June. So beginning July 1st, this in 2022 through the following June. The notable change that's different than what we've been doing before is we're recommending restricting the use of dogs from July 1st through November 1st and March 30, that's 2022. March 31st through June 30th, 2023 on, that's not a change. The change is on the South Slope units. No dogs May 28th through June 30th on the South Slope Bonanza Diamond Mountain Vernal unit, the South Slope Yellowstone unit, and the Wasatch Mountains of Inniquin and Current Creek. And that's just to avoid having dogs in the field during the bait season. Try to avoid some of the law enforcement concerns that we have up there. So other than that, everything else is the same. We're just adjusting seasons for the calendar year and just recommending moving forward with that.
Thank you. Questions from the RAC? Go ahead, Austin.
Darren, I'm still very confused, not being an avid houndsman to keep up with all these dates and trying to figure out when to bring this up. But I still want the spot and stock tag to be the same season dates as the harvest objective.
Yeah.
Now, the spot and stock tag doesn't even show up on these dates anywhere. Is that because it's
not changing? We're not recommending any change. So spot and stock season will be the same next year as it currently is. So in the fall, right, for Cougars.
Now, to extend that spot and stock season and to mirror it to the harvest objective, when would be the proper time to do that change?
Well, we're talking, right now it'd be, and this would be beginning July 1st, 2022 through.
Because we're finally caught up, right?
Right. So if you wanted to make a motion along those lines, this would be the time to do that.
Do you have any concerns with that season running the same time as the harvest objective? And
I think the biggest, it's a little different for bears, but for Cougars, probably the biggest challenge is that, actually, no, I don't have any concerns. I think we could do something like that.
Okay.
Austin, remind me, you made that motion before, correct?
I think you did in July.
Well, we talked about it, but I don't remember if we demanded that it was a motion or how we said it.
Okay.
I don't remember doing the motion. I remember talking about it, but I think that we were saying they were gonna.
Because everything was changing
Okay.
to July 1st anyway.
Right.
And I would just like everything to get onto that regulatory year, so it makes sense to the user that
Right.
is out in January, that he
So
can still use that
spot and
spot
stock
stock
would be a
tag and it's not
year-round.
expired, and now he's got to go buy a different tag to do the same thing.
Yeah, we'd want everything to be July 1 through June 30th going forward. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that actually does seem correct. We didn't have a motion, but it seemed like at the time there was no opposition to it. So kind of back full circle. We don't have any, oh, sorry, go
I
ahead.
had one additional question. This is just because I'm not familiar with these rules as well as I should be maybe. You mentioned in your presentation several times that we're moving dogs away from the bait. But in your July 1st to November, basically the entire 7 months of the year, you're saying no dogs, but I didn't hear in your presentation why do we not allow dogs
So the only change,
on the LaSalle, San Juan?
yeah,
Cliffs?
that's not a change. And the reason, and that is to avoid some overlaps with hunts that they have going on those particular units. So,
Okay.
and they are, but it is related to bear hunting. The thing that's changed, the new one is on those south slope units.
Okay.
And again, it's to, in our bear recommendation, we're trying on those south slope units to separate bait and hound hunting in the spring and summer. That's our recommendation. And so this is an effort to close the loophole that someone who's hunting with dogs during bait season wouldn't say, well, I'm just hunting cougars. We're trying to get dogs out of the field while there's bait in the field during that season on those units.
Go ahead, Gene.
The doggone bear and cougar recommendations, or the rules, I should say, are so doggone mixed up and convoluted. I don't know how you keep the hell track of them.
Sometimes I don't. I've got a few things tonight I'm going to bring up.
I mean,
I agree with you, Gene. And so the current bear plan expires in 2023. And so we are going to be convening a new bear committee. And when we come back with bear, one of the things we're going to be presenting is a new plan. So my objective is to try to simplify. It really is confusing. We've got a lot of different things going on and overlaps and conflicts in the field. And so we're not on bear yet, but when we get there, there are a few recommendations to try to address some short-term things. But we really do need to do a deep dive with a committee and try to simplify some of this stuff.
Okay, so if the situation as it is now, say Sam, Joe, and Tom go out together with the dog.
This sounds like
Sam
I don't like
Sam has a cougar permit. Joe has a bear permit. And Tom has the dog.
Mm-hmm.
So are they legal to chase?
If they've got, yes. So the person that owns the dogs can chase if there's a person with a legal permit either for cougar or bear, so that they could. Once somebody harvests, though, they would need to still have so yeah, I mean, Gene, you could harvest a bear and then continue to hunt cougar with your friends' dogs, or even if you're paying a guide to run dogs for you. But once those permits are filled, you're done, unless you have a pursuit permit. And then you can chase during the pursuit seasons. As long as someone has a valid pursuit permit, you can do that.
As long as there isn't a bait season going on.
As long as the season's open for that activity, yeah. Yeah.
I don't think he thought you'd be able to answer that.
I know. I was a little worried, Gene.
Okay.
I was hoping that a law enforcement officer would come up behind me and put their hand on my shoulder and say, no. Because I think anyway, yeah. We won't draw this out. But yeah, you could, as long as you've got a legal permit for the activity and the dogs, the dogs, as long as they're with you and they have to be with you the whole time. They can't go chase up another canyon and then call you and say, you got to be with them the whole time. But yeah, you're right. It's complicated and sometimes it's hard to think through all those things.
Okay, this predator situation on the Cougars and the director can open units to practically unrestricted hunting.
Yeah.
But a recommendation I read somewhere says, or something anyway, says the biologist can determine. Well, the legislature says the director can determine.
Yeah.
And this says the biologist can determine. Now,
Yeah.
who's going to
So
determine?
there's a couple of things. The legislature did pass a statute 2 years ago, I guess now, 2 sessions ago, that directs the division director that if we've got concerns about mule deer numbers on a particular unit, that he should take immediate action to address predators if the biologist on the ground determines that that is a cause of concern on that unit. So when we wrote a policy to direct our folks how do we have the legislation, here's the policy, this is how we implement this on the ground. And we opted in that policy to really give a lot of power to our district biologists to make those determinations. They're the folks on the ground. They know what's going on with their particular deer herds. And I'm really comfortable with that. We've got a lot of really good people. And so if a district biologist comes to me and the director and recommends we need some predator control on this unit, we're going to be supportive. And they do have to explain, it's not just a gut feeling. They do need to show us, here's what's going on with our adult doe mortality, for example. Here's what we're seeing in fawn mortality if they have that data. And so it is data driven, but we do rely on them to inform us.
Yeah, well, it's pretty well been established to get it going. What I'm concerned about is how the hell you ever get it stopped.
Yeah, we've had those discussions, and if you're ever going to do any kind of predator management, it does have to be sustained for a period of time, and then we look at it twice a year, Gene. We look at it in July after we get winter mortality data, and then we look at it again in this time of year in December when we're out catching deer and looking at body condition going into the winter. So they're always looking at it. But having said that, you need to let it run its course. 1 year isn't enough. You've got to get after it for a period of time, and then once we pull them back out, it's going to take a little bit of time for things to level out. So it's a longer term proposition, but we certainly have those discussions.
Gene?
Appreciate your explanation.
Thanks, Gene.
Gene, on your first question there on the biologist versus the director, I think you could think of it as the biologist is like the RAC. He's making a recommendation to the director, and the director is like the wildlife board in this scenario. The biologists have the on-the-ground knowledge. They're making a recommendation to the director. The director is the one that has the authority to actually make it happen. So similar to the RACs and the board.
One more question for you, Darren. The 3-day waiting period when you purchase a permit, is that an antiquated rule? Is that something we still feel is super viable? And I give you this example. I'm getting feedback from outfitters that take hunters out on a lion hunt. They kill a lion. They want to go buy another harvest objective permit, but now the hunter has to sit for 3 days before his permit's valid and they can pursue. Doesn't seem logical on an open unit that we want to make that guy sit for 3 days. Can you give me your opinion on that?
I think the history on that is to avoid a canned hunt. So you don't put a cougar up a tree and then go run into town and buy a permit and come up and shoot it, or bear for that matter. So it's really an ethics, certainly not a biological thing. It's just about, but you're right. Now that a person can get a second permit, if they're planning on taking 2 lions, maybe they ought to buy both permits and before they go. But we could certainly have a discussion. Again, it's more social than biological. So that's certainly something the RAC could address if you have some concerns.
And I may bring that up later at another meeting, but I guess I would like to see it like other states, like Colorado. You can buy 2 bear permits, but 1 at a time. So once your first one is checked in, then your second one can be purchased. And I think we should do something like that going down.
And right now you can buy 2 cougar permits the same day and go. You can have them both in your pocket. So if you anticipate, I would just say if, under the current rule, if you anticipate taking more than one within that 3-day period after you take the first one, I'd just buy 2. Yeah, I know, exactly. That's all we're about.
Any additional questions? Go ahead, Vernon.
So when we made the motion on trail cams under the big game, did that include this cougar and bear deal?
Yeah, I
too?
think what we'll do is the language will be the same in all 3 rules, just so it's consistent. So yes, I appreciate the public bringing up the depredation angle. That's just something we overlooked when we were looking at this. So that's certainly something we support.
Yeah, and well, in the past, we talked about getting the numbers down. I don't see why, I didn't know we were covering it all under the big game.
Yeah,
maybe we
I
ought
think
to-
what we'll do is, I anticipate that if the board changes some of the language there, and I know it'll come up, we would just make the language change to all 3 rules would be the practice. And that, honestly, that really is a good way to go. We want producers to kill the lion or bear that's killing their livestock, and having a camera that tells you instantly, hey, there it is, it's on the kill, let's go get it, is a really good tool. We certainly support that.
Yeah, and what I was getting at is, we're trying to get the predators down. And if we could use cameras on the cougars and bear, then, it'd help out.
Yeah, I think
I just wanted
certainly,
to-
yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think guys use cameras quite a bit on bait stations, so this would only affect fall bait season, bait hunters. And I guess some guys are using cougar camera for cougar hunting in the winter, but most of the time you can cut a track and it's probably not as big of an issue. We have had a lot of success during the summer with some houndsmen that are capturing cougars for our study in central Utah using cameras in the summer. But that's a research thing that would be exempt. So go ahead, Kevin.
Verlin, just to clarify, so the motion that we passed was specific to big game with cameras. So as this RAC voted, it would not include bear and cougar because it specifically said big game, which is.
Yeah, that was my question. Big game have horns.
Yeah, so
Cougars
hoof
and
species
bear
essentially. Yeah.
are
I think-
different, so.
That's what this RAC voted on.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Kobe, but I think the big game language has the cougar and bear in it as well. So.
But it might, but the way this RAC voted, it said specifically big
Oh,
game.
okay. So we probably ought to address it then.
But then when we accept the rest as presented, what I understand is the end of his presentation says we'll mirror this language in bear and cougar.
Yeah, so and the way that we presented it was because that would be the giant loophole, right? The giant loophole is everybody buys a spot and stock cougar permit, and then they hunt big game with a camera. And so that's the rationale behind it. And the exemption for producers is the middle ground that we were definitely willing to meet because we didn't want to adversely impact them. And again, the season is not outside of the big game season. So if you're hunting cougar or bear outside of that July 31st to January 31st, there is no regulation on cougar or bear outside of those season dates. It's just because we want to stay true to what we've committed to at big game.
I didn't remember the language about mirroring it. So when you pass the remainder, you passed that mirroring language. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think as long as everybody's clear what we're all on the same page, I think that's the best thing.
Any additional questions? Okay, questions from the public. All right, we don't have any comments on this one. We have comments on the next. So comments from the RAC on the cougar.
I'm kind of like Gene. It's a little layered and complicated, and I've bought tags for 2 years, and either there's too much snow or no snow to track them. So I'm fine with the way it is, the proposal.
We'd entertain a motion if there's no other comments. Do you have a comment, Austin? Okay.
I'll move we accept the recommendations as presented.
Second.
So a motion from Verlin to accept as presented and a second by Tammy. Any additional discussion?
I would like to see an amendment to that motion to modify or ask the wildlife board to ask the director to modify the spot and stock dates to mirror the harvest objective dates of July 1st through June 30th.
So we've got I can't say that word. An amendment to the motion. Do we have a second on that amendment?
I'll second it.
All right. So the motion, if we could restate the motion, we have a motion to align the harvest objective with the spot and stock with the harvest objective and accept the remainder as presented would be our motion.
I'm confused.
Well, just read the proclamation, Gene, it will clear it up.
I'm sure. I thought spot and stock was 365 days.
It is not currently. And the spot and stock permit for Cougar is a director action. And so that's why we're asking I assume why the RAC is asking the director to adjust those dates.
And I thought it was statewide.
It is statewide, but it's only, and I'd have to look up the dates for you, Gene, but it isn't currently year round. It's like November 3rd through, it's August. Yeah, you're right. It's like August
Does
1st
a
through
spot
December
and stock
31st.
killed cougar come out of a harvest objective number?
No. It's a very low success hunt.
Then why are we worrying about spot and stock?
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so the amendment, when we have an amendment and a second, is to align the spot and stock season with the harvest objective season. If we pass that, then we go back to the original, which is to accept as presented with the amendment added. So that's where we're at, is we need to vote on the amendment.
The amendment.
So clarification though. So the harvest objective is that July 1st through June 30th, right? So that's basically that is year round.
Yep.
Right? So then there would be no confusion other than what your tag fits.
Does that need to say, I mean, his amendment said ask the director or approach the director to do that? Or is that good enough?
That's what I understood, just because that is a director action, that hunt. I don't know if that's how it stays or if the wildlife board controls that hunt now.
So the amendment would be to add. The amendment would be to ask the director through the wildlife board to align the spot and stock season with the harvest objective season. Is that correct?
The director and the wildlife board, because depending on which, the wildlife board has some authority here and the director has some authority. You want them both doing the same thing. So it's
Okay.
not to ask him to ask them, it's to ask both of them.
All right.
So.
But he's.
So
You
the
clear,
amendment is to ask the director and the wildlife board to align the spot and stock seasons with the harvest objective season.
Okay. I think we're good. All right. A motion with a second. Let's go ahead and vote on that, and then we'll vote on the amendment, then we'll go back and vote on the original motion. Okay. Austin.
Yes.
Gene.
No.
With exasperation.
Chuck.
Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
Tammy.
Yes.
Verlin.
Yes.
Nick.
Yes.
Chad.
Yes.
Bart.
No.
All right. And let's go first with Gene. Did you want to clarify the reason for the opposing vote?
As I said at the start of this discussion, it is so damn confusing that I can't figure out whether I'm voting for or against. So no vote's safer than a yes.
And Bart, did you want to address your opposing vote?
I didn't hear a compelling reason to change the way it is.
Okay. So the motion or the amendment passes 7-2. Let's go back and vote on the original motion now, and that would be to accept the remainder as presented. Austin.
Yes.
Gene.
Yes.
Chuck.
Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
Tammy.
Yes.
Verland.
Yes.
Nick.
Yes.
Chad.
Yes.
And Bart.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. That passes unanimously. Final item, black bear rules. So Darren,
Okay.
if you can walk us through this one quickly again.
Yes, so let me just quickly, everything you saw in the presentation and on the large spreadsheet, the number of permits is correct, but when we looked at the season tables, the hunt tables, we noticed a couple of things were missing. So just so that the RAC is aware, let me just tell you which ones those are. So the tables will be amended to include 2 permits on the Monroe, which is in the presentation. One is in the spring, one is in the summer for the bait season. The Fillmore Pavant has a spring permit, and that was not in the spring table that you all got. And then finally, there's a multi-season permit, one each on the Ponsegont and the Mount Dutton units. Again, these permits are all included in the totals we presented, but the tables were missing those hunts. Then, moving on, we're not recommending a lot of changes to bear recommendations. We did adjust permits according to the plan's guidelines. So let me just highlight a couple of things that we are recommending that'll be different than what we're currently doing. And again, this is a 3-year recommendation for bears. On those South Slope units that I mentioned before for Mountain Lion, the South Slope Bonanza, Diamond Mountain Vernal, South Slope Yellowstone, and Wasatch Mountains of Inniquin Current Creek, we're recommending that those seasons be changed for hounds April 2nd through May 27th, which is the Friday before Memorial Day, and that the bait season not overlap and begin May 28th and run through the 26th. And then on the Book Cliffs, Bitter Creek South unit, we're recommending that hounds and bait not be in the field at the same time. So August 6th through 19th, it would be hounds only. August 20th through October 6th, bait only. And August 7th through November 3rd, again, hounds only. Currently, there's a restriction for hounds during that middle portion, but you could use bait during the hound season. We're trying to eliminate that overlap. And we've got some law enforcement folks here tonight, if you're interested in or want to discuss their concerns. This is primarily a law enforcement concern that we're making these recommendations for. And then the other change we're recommending is that during the fall season, August 8th through the 27th, and then again, November 3rd through the 13th, that people choose whether they're going to hunt with dogs or they're going to hunt with bait. Currently, if you draw that permit, you can use either method. So you could conceivably have a bait station active and hunt with dogs, and that makes it difficult for our law enforcement folks to weed out, was this your bait station, but you're hunting with dogs? You know where the bait station is, obviously, because you've got it running. We're proposing making people make a choice how they want to hunt. So other than that, all their seasons are just adjusted for the calendar year from last year. And again, with those changes I mentioned to the hunt tables, the permits were in the presentation. I won't go through each unit unless someone wants me to address something specifically.
Thanks, Darren. I have a question, and I do appreciate that you actually already brought up that the black bear plan is going to be revisited in 2023. So perhaps I'm willing to wait till then, although I think sometimes you may establish unintended precedent. So I'm going to ask this anyways.
Sure.
We've been going back and forth on this for years, and it's the idea of the overlap of baiting and hounds. And I know it's always brought up that it's causes some enforcement issues and there's conflict. But last time we got a number to this, the conflict was extremely minimal. And the reality is that no one's requiring the bait to be out during the hound season. If you don't want dogs on your bait, you can wait, which is what we'd be moving it to anyways. Do we have numbers of the conflicts that we're changing this rule for?
We do have some formal complaints, but we're really relying on our experience of our enforcement officers in the field. So I think maybe I'd throw that to Wyatt or even some of the regional folks. Maybe discuss how this impacts them, and maybe they can characterize how big of a problem.
And that's great. I'd be happy to have you speak to it, but I'd really like to hear the number of formal complaints.
Okay. Do you have that? Oh.
Nope, I guess I'll kind of quickly explain. I understand you want the number of formal complaints. Our formal complaints would be documented in a crime report, which we'd only pull if we have reason to believe a crime was committed. And so when we get formal complaints, we don't have a system set up in the enforcement section to track formal complaints currently. That is something we can look at going into the future. But our complaints would be in the form of a crime report, which is only pulled and documented when we believe a crime is committed.
Okay, I'll address that in comments in a minute then. Thank you. Any additional questions from the RAC? All right, comments from or questions from the public? Go ahead.
Can we just ask from here?
You can, but we won't acknowledge them.
So the season dates that he read with those units, is that statewide dates or just those units?
Just those units in the spring and summer. Just those
So
units.
the rest of the units around here are not going to end on the 27th of May?
They'll be the same.
They'll go to the Memorial.
They will end on the 27th, but there'll still be a week overlap with the bait season. So we're recommending that we stop hunting with hounds before Memorial Day weekend, statewide.
Because?
Just the conflicts with recreational users and dogs.
Baiters have all the bears in the whole month of June. Bears didn't even come out this year till like May 26th. But
yeah, they sometimes stay in there.
Any other questions from the public? Okay, go ahead.
JJ Brewer is my name. So just to verify, because I know it's confusing, I know there's some season change dates, but again, it is statewide ending hounding May 27th.
Right, right. So that's a 3-day shorter than what we've traditionally done with hounds. And that's primarily just to avoid the Memorial Day weekend.
Okay, and then I don't know if I'm cutting into your presentation short or anything, but isn't there also some changes with spot and stock tags on 3 units in the state, or is?
Yeah, well, what we've done is we're recommending that spot and stock season, that fall season, go to harvest objective instead of something you put in the draw. So they'd be unlimited tags with quotas on the units. Is that what you're asking about, JJ?
That was my comment or my question, and I can comment later when it's the appropriate time.
Do you want to just stay up, JJ? You got a comment card. You actually have 2. I'm assuming you'll do them in one comment, right?
Yeah, a couple of them are questions, but yes. So I guess, and I can talk to that now. And I am a member of the Utah Houndsman Association, as you know, and I also speak for myself. But I guess my concern with the shortening dates is by far the best way to harvest a bear, to know what you're harvesting, is with hounds, because we can stand under the tree and verify if it is a male or a female or what specifically that bear is. I believe we have a great group of houndsmen right now, probably the youngest, most moldable group of houndsmen we've ever had. I hope so, in the way that we can help ranchers and wildlife. I think we've done a good job there, and we want to do that. I'd hate to see our season shortened in any way. Specifically for those reasons, the best way to harvest bears is with hounds. So that would be one of my main concerns. My other main concern would be with those harvest objective units, and I don't know if I'm getting ahead, specifically the San Juan Sound book cliffs, right, where they're going to do harvest objective spot and stock tags. Do we have a number on how many wounded bears were shot at or wounded on those current spot and stock hunts?
No, no.
Okay.
Not unless someone found the carcass or something like that. I'm not aware of anything.
My concern with that, and again, I'm going 2 directions here, but I've spent a ton of time on those units, and I see it very often where people come and ask for help because they are very nervous to go look for a bear that they shot at. They're sure they didn't hit it, Bears don't leave a lot of blood. They're a different animal. My concern with doing an over-the-counter harvest objective hunt with that is unlimited tags. I know there's a cap on it, but you're gonna have a lot of bears shot at. Again, the best way to harvest bears is with hounds. I'm all for hounds and helping achieve those goals. So I'd hate to see us lose time in the field. And I know citations, I believe, were 0 according to the report I read, as far as baiting with and having issues with hounds running off baits. So
Yeah,
thanks.
there aren't a lot of citations and there aren't a lot of formal complaints, but the feedback we get is, our officers will have conversations with people and, hey, I know there's baits in this drainage. So how am I going to stay out of trouble? You're putting me in a kind of a hard position. If I can't intentionally chase off a bait, but I know there are baits here because there are bears here, and it kind of creates this gray area. So those are our concerns, and we could certainly address that in the plan. But we tried to just make a couple of tweaks for this next 3 years to try to address that a little bit, and it certainly needs more discussion as well.
Thanks. Next comment from Jeff.
I'm Jeff Brewer. I'm just representing myself. I would just recommend, unlike JJ, I would hate to see the season shortened even 3 days. I spent a lot of time on the LaSalle's this year. I had the opportunity to be retired and hunting, and I spent a lot of time, had no conflicts with baiters. What I would suggest is one of two things to Darren is either change it to the Memorial Weekend, which is what we all want, and they can start setting baits on Memorial Weekend and start hunting, because they can have a bear on the bait in one day, one night. We hate to lose Memorial Weekend. It's traditionally for 40 years we've hunted it. Or let's just bag all of it and do your big study and next year with your new committee and let them come up with new recommendations. That's all I would say. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. We'll go to comments from the RAC. And I wanted to make a comment to start off here. I appreciate the comments, Jeff. Actually, I think what you said probably really aligns with where I'm going. Several years ago, we really pushed, because we kept hearing there were conflicts between bait and houndsmen. And when we finally got data, we found out that there were 2 complaints. And then we hear that there's, complaining going on, but they're not formal and there's no citations. And I guess in addition to that, several years ago, Utah Archery Association and the houndsmen got together. So those are the groups representing supposedly the people in conflict. And they said, let's overlap. We can get along. And so the organizations that represent those sportsmen are saying, we could, we're fine with this. I just don't like the idea of limiting opportunity because of perceived issues. That would be my statement. I would love to see keeping that as open as we can. I've hunted bears over bait. I've hunted bears with hounds, and I didn't have conflict in either of those situations. Not once. Go ahead, Austin.
Darren, what's the problem with, or what would be the problem with pushing the limited entry, no dogs bait season hunt back even further? If we allowed them to hunt with dogs later into May or the first part of June, couldn't that whole hunt be slid back?
We don't want dogs in the field in June with fawns hitting the ground, and so that's why we've avoided letting hound hunting go later than that. Braden's right. The current system with that week overlap was something we sat down with Utah Archery and the houndsmen and came to a compromise. So that's kind of a compromise place. I guess the only thing I'd add is just that we just hear these, again, it's difficult to quantify. So maybe it is, maybe the plan is the appropriate place to do a deep dive into that. But yeah. So I think we definitely wouldn't want hounds running much later into the summer. Well, any later than June, just because of our baby big game hitting the ground.
Yeah, Darren, I would add that since that time, at the time bait hunting was limited to archery, it's no longer limited to archery. So it's not just that user group. There's a
Yeah.
much broader user group that's able to hunt over bait now.
Frankly, it's difficult to find a bait hunting representative. There isn't an organization other than the archers, but now it's a bigger group. And so I think hunting with hounds certainly is the most selective way to go, because you can look, but with bait stations, you also get an opportunity to look at animals as they come in and take your time. And if they've got cubs, eventually cubs will come with sows too. So those two methods really are the best if we want to be selective in the bears that are being taken.
I guess then my additional comment would be, we're revisiting this plan in 2023, and why stir it up now if we don't have quantifiable reasons to change? It's not quantifiable. We've established that, I believe.
My comment, Mr. Chair, is we have to decide what we're going to do in that plan, if we're going to be a bait state or we're going to be a dog state. I'm familiar with states out west. They usually either allow both and they allow them to run in conjunction, because enforcement doesn't allow to distinguish. Like Idaho, you can run bait, you can run dogs off bait. Sweet. Arizona, no bait, right? But you can run dogs. So I think we need to take some serious input and draw that line in the sand and decide what we're going to be, because trying to play both sides of the fence is getting messy, and we're crushing the houndsmen down to bring up the bait guys because they don't have dogs, and it's making it a mess.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, just, I guess a question though, because reading this, the next 3-year black bear recommendation cycle begins in 2022. So are you saying July 1st? Or what?
This will begin with this coming season this spring. So it's a little different than Cougar. It's not a July.
So if you're doing a 3-year cycle next spring, then when is your board going to?
Yeah, we'll put a board together next year and work on it and have it ready for it. We got a little bit out of whack because we should have been on 3-year cycles with the bear according to the plans. We're actually going to be an extra year out. We'll have plenty of time to have a good discussion with the bear committee.
So the 3-year cycle will not start in 2022?
It will, yes. This next cycle will run 3 years. So we'll be back in 2024 with new recommendations and a plan revision.
All right.
And of course, we'll visit you each year and let you know how things are going.
Go ahead, Gene.
I'm just going to vent a little bit here, because I think that bears and cougars got blamed, or they were set up to be blamed, and so we've increased the pressure on them. And I didn't like the way that it came about, and I'm not sure that it was the right thing to do, mostly because the way it came about wasn't very scientific or anything else. But I want to say that as far as nature goes, foxes feed their young on the young rabbits and young potguts that they can catch. They feed on the young of the prey animals. So do bears and cougars. And so you get a idea that you're going to stop that by increasing the bears tags. But what are you going to do? You can't shoot the sow with cubs. She's the one that has to eat fawns and calves to feed her young. So you go out and you shoot a couple of boars and say, well, we showed them damn bears. Won't have no more trouble there. And so I just wanted to bring that up, that maybe we got to watch just what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Austin, I was just going to add, we may have wounding statistics in our harvest data. I need to look at that raw data and just see. I think we do. I know we do on big game. We ask if did you wound anything, so that it's voluntary info, but we may be able to get it at that. So.
All right, any additional comments from the board or from the RAC? We'd entertain a motion then. Had good discussion.
What does the RAC think about extending the hunt by 4 days? They're already overlap a week. Make them overlap 10, 11 days and give them Memorial Day weekend. I'm not as experienced as I should be in this, so.
I don't get to vote, but I'm definitely in favor.
So would that be?
That'd be essentially status quo.
Status quo, yeah.
If we want to keep it like it is now.
I would just leave it the way it is and not make the changes in here, right?
2021, 2022, 2020, 2021 season date.
Correct, yeah. Adjusting for the calendar.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, so I believe the motion is to accept as presented, but keep the 2020 and 2021 season dates adjusting for the calendar. Correct? Okay, any additional discussion? All right, let's go ahead.
So question, are there any proposals in here that I'm looking through here and we've got a bunch of date changes that we're going to reject basically by accepting last year's. Is there anything else in here that we're missing that?
If we don't make any the only other thing that would change this year would be requiring someone to choose whether they're going to hunt with hounds or bait in the fall, where we currently have nearly 100, well, it's 100% on most unit overlap between hounds and bait.
So our current motion wouldn't impact that.
Because it says accept as presented, which includes that provision.
Right, yeah, so that wouldn't change that, but it would readjust those spring and summer season dates.
Okay.
All right, let's go ahead and vote. Austin?
Yes.
Gene?
Yeah.
Chuck?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Tammy?
Yes.
Verland?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Chad?
Yes.
Bart?
Yes.
Passed unanimously. Thank you. That's it for agenda items today. We appreciate everyone sticking with us. It was a long meeting, but there was a lot to go through. I guess the final thing to discuss is just the next meeting, which is, I don't know that I have it.
April.
Not until April. So even if we discussed it, we'd forget about it by then, right? So we will get word out to everybody and enjoy a little bit of a break.
I can give you the date if you want it.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Again, I do want to just extend once again, appreciate the public input on the meeting. This is the way it's supposed to work. I hope that everyone feels like the public was listened to. There were things that changed because you guys were here. So we appreciate your time and your effort in being here. So thank you.
Merry Christmas.
I do want to say, keep an eye on the legislature and Merry Christmas.
Okay, meeting adjourned.